Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
Jason moved skillfully through the city, trying to avoid the congestion on the road. His hands were shaking, his nerves were on edge, and a man's voice came over the speakerphone. "No way. It's not Christina," he answered the call. "I understand your shock, Jason, but that's what we're waiting for you to identify. We need to make sure the woman on our table is your spouse Christina and not another. I mean, she's quite young, only 31 years old. We wanted kids so badly," Jason reread. His insanely expensive sports car maneuvered between cars with ease. He was only a year older than his wife, but he already owned his own company and made a sizable profit. The family didn't need anything and was respected both in and out of town. Christina had long complained of chest pains. "We both didn't pay much attention to it," he spoke in a stream of voice. His unexpected interlocutor listened to him quietly, accustomed to the behavior of people in grief. "She worked hard. The whole business was kept up by the two of us. No wonder, I can't believe it." His voice sounded completely broken. "I'm refusing all sorts of tests and autopsies in advance. There's no need for that at all. Christine has experienced enough pain in her lifetime. Let her body not be touched at the morgue," Jason said. Badham was met by the pathologist Paul Williams. "You and I spoke on the phone." He, with a mournful face, lightly touched Jason's cheek. "Come this way. This is spouse Christine." Jason made his way into a brightly lit room with green tiles on the walls. There was a body lying on a gurney under a sheet. Seeing the dangling arm, Jason exclaimed, "God," he struggled to hold back tears. As Paul Williams pulled the sheet away from Christina's face, Jason uttered, "That's my girl." "I'm sorry for your loss," Paul said. Third time on shift, he'd seen a lot of things on his job, but seeing the emotions of relatives of the dead was always difficult. Jason could tell by the look on his face how broken he was, but still held himself in check, not letting the tears spill over. He gingerly touched Christina's breathless face. "Christina's body is still warm. She was alive half an hour ago," he said painfully. "Why didn't I know this morning?" was the last time I'd talked to her. A few minutes later, Jason stepped out into the hallway and his face changed. He turned to the orderlies with a calm look. "Guys, I have a favor to ask of you. You won't be offended by the price. We need to get on with the funeral as soon as possible. An unnecessary fussing with tests and autopsies will only stall things. You'd better hurry up and release the body. Get everything ready." Jason held out a few bills to the greedy orderlies. "This is between you and me. Absolutely, we won't tell anyone," Alex promised. He and his partner Ben were frequently involved in illegal activities after serving time for extortion and hooliganism. The two prison mates had only managed to get jobs as morgue attendants. "I'm counting on you," Jason said. He was pleased with the way he'd set things up, but he wasn't in a hurry to leave for the office. He would still have to inform everyone close and familiar of his wife's untimely death, listen to tons of condolences, and receive many visitors. But for now, he had to make sure that Paul Williams wouldn't cause him any problems, and Christine wouldn't bother him again. Finally, he would be able to say goodbye to her for good. In the meantime, Alex and Ben were preparing to transport Christina's body to the funeral home. "Beautiful broad," was young yet Ben said, looking at Christina's face. "So, her hubby's not too devastated. What's on these rich people's minds?" "I don't know. First, he's all shook up over his wife's body. Now he just wants to bury it. But what do I care? The main thing is they got the money. There's not much to do. We're used to situations like this. I've only been out for 4 months. I'm not going back, okay? Don't worry. Everything will be fine. We just have to stay out of sight. Look at her. She looks alive. It's kind of creepy." Alex laughed. "Ben, what are you doing?" But still he looked closely at Christina. "Real. And her skin is soft." He poked a finger at her exposed shoulder and shuddered. "I've never sat like that, and I never will." Alex crossed himself. The voice of Paul Williams appearing made the paramedics wince. "Where are you taking her?" "I haven't done an autopsy yet." "Come on, comrades, bring her back here." Alex and Ben looked at each other. "But we had a deal with Jason. He said he refused to do the autopsy. He wants a funeral as soon as possible." Businessman Paul frowned and stepped out into the hallway, speaking to Jason at once. "I can't release your wife's body without an autopsy. In order for me to sign all the paperwork, I have to go through the necessary procedures. What will they give you?" "The situation is transparent to me. Christina died of a heart attack." "I agree with that. I don't want confirmation. I don't need any tests." "Are they going to bring my wife back to life?" Jason asked indignantly. He'd noticed that Paul Williams was a man of principle, so he wouldn't just neglect his professional duties and risk his reputation and career. "Come closer to me," Jason asked, reaching into his pocket for his wallet. "You'll be fine with that request." He handed Paul all the bills he had left. He raised his eyebrows in surprise, not at all expecting this turn of events. He hastily accepted the money and stuffed it into his pants pocket, so it wouldn't show. He looked around and leaned toward Jason. "Well, that's a different conversation," he said in a low, friendly tone. "I'm more than happy to expedite the transfer of your wife's body, Jason. I'm obligated to do the autopsy. "Fine, do your autopsy," Christine's husband snapped. But he calmed down. Now he didn't have to worry about the morgue staff. He'd bribed everyone, and they couldn't rat on him, or they'd be out of a job. If the orderlies lost a little, Paul Williams would lose his license. And if he decides to talk too much, without wasting a minute, Paul got to work. "Comrades, you see the body. We're going to do an autopsy," he commanded, looking at Alex and Ben. Only a few seconds separated Christina from the irreparable. "Don't touch her. Don't touch that woman," shouted suddenly across the hallway from some madman who had inexplicably found himself in the morgue. He was breathing heavily and holding his heart, trying to catch his breath. "Who the hell is this scarecrow?" Ben stared at him. Standing before them was the usual grubby hobo in dirty clothes, put together in a single set from several garbage cans. It was hard to tell the age of the tired man with the beard and bushy eyebrows. "Are you lost or something?" Alex addressed him. "Or are you having trouble with your head? Get out of here." "This isn't a circus for you. That's my wife. Don't hurt her. Call the police." And there was Andrew, frantically pointing his finger at Jason, who froze in place as if struck by thunder. He couldn't even find the words to shut the intruder up somehow. "Call me right now. What are you standing there for?" "Idiots." Paul Williams stepped out into the hallway. He looked sternly around at everyone present. "Christina was brought to you. She's my wife. Don't cut her. Call the police." "I'm begging you." "Okay." Paul nodded and pulled off his clean gloves. He immediately threw Jason an angry glare. If he'd known what he'd offered him the money for, he never would have taken it. The police arrived on the scene, and at first thought Andrew was crazy. "What do we have here?" "Drunken ramblings," Russell Davidson asked tiredly, looking at him. "I'm neither drunk nor crazy. My name is Andrew Johnson, and Christina, who was brought in this morning, is my wife, or rather ex-wife Guliev." "The same one," Val gasped Harry, trying to get a good look at the unkempt tramp across from the missing businessman from 5 years ago. "The same one," Andrew nodded. "And this is him." He shifted his gaze to Jason, who had arrived, and was prevented from slipping away before the police arrived. "Alex, Ben, this is my former friend Jason. Now I know. Everyone knows your sneaky nature." No one expected Andrew to lunge at his former friend and punch him as Jason flew off into the wall and landed on the back of his head. Val and Russell immediately grabbed him under the arms, holding him in place. "And I'll beat you with my own hands over her." "You rotten bastard." Andrew wouldn't stop lashing out. "Andrew, do you hear that? Do you hear that?" Jason shouted. "This is a direct threat of reprisal. You are all witnesses." The bickering of the men was broken by a loud female scream. Everyone rushed to the section where a terrified Christina was sitting on the floor with her knees wrapped around herself. Christina, Andrew dropped down beside her, covering her with his jacket and pulling her close to him. "My love, I'm here. I'm with you again." Christina was shaking. She was weak and scared. Several pairs of eyes stared at her in horror. "There's Tina." "If you hadn't come running, she'd be as good as horsewhip by now," Ben gasped, realizing that Paul Williams had almost performed an autopsy on a living person. So he looked around at those present. Doctor examined the victim and sedate her. He pointed to Andrew. "You invited me." Ben nodded to him. "I'll stay to look after the victim. I need a pathologist." On the way to the police station, Andrew Johnson was shaking. He couldn't believe what had happened to him in just a couple of hours. Now his life was going to change. Everything would go back to the way it was before. He still hoped he could get it all back. But what worried him most of all was Christina's fate. He loved her so much. Even though he hadn't been there for 5 years, how would she be without him? Could he trust that pathologist? Andrew didn't relax. And then when Val Harry spoke to him, he got a mug of hot sweet tea and a good attitude. "Tell me in order," Val Harry asked him. He sighed, covered his eyes a little, and spoke. "Who do you know who I am?" 5 years ago, I was traveling to Lakeside to negotiate with Jason. We knew each other from university. We were economics majors together. We dreamed of owning our own business together, and we had the same vision of doing business. I thought of Jason as my friend, Andrew said, gripping the handle of his mug tightly, realizing how wrong he was. I knew him before I knew Cy. We vacationed together a lot. Sometimes Jason introduced us to his girlfriends, but his relationships never lasted long. I want to emphasize that I trusted Jason like a brother. I had no idea that he would betray me in such a way. Our meeting with potential partners in Lakeside promised a lucrative partnership. Jason and I were anticipating a huge profit, and we were overjoyed, and we were the young wolves in the newspapers. We were the role models of the youth. Everyone dreamed of such a meteoric rise. Our firm developed surprisingly fast. When everything was just beginning, we could not dream that not even a year later we would be able to afford to buy our own place. So on the 3-hour drive to Lakeside, I had a big meal before I got there, and Jason started begging me to stop on the way and get something to eat at a restaurant. I didn't refuse, nor did I suspect it. Even when the supposedly best restaurant, Mikhailovsky, turned out to be just a canteen with street hooligans hanging around it. They were on to us as soon as we got out of the car. Jason was never one for words and could stoop to any level to prove his superiority. Before I knew it, I was in the center of a scuffle. But I was the only one getting hit. I didn't realize it was Jason. He'd lured me into a backwoods neighborhood where no one knew who we were, hired some thugs, and got away with it. I was in a lot of trouble. I spent the night in the alley where I'd been beaten the night before. I woke up with a bad headache, and my mind was blank. I had lost my memory, and from that moment on I didn't even know who I was. A group of vagabonds took me in and taught me how to survive. Together we roamed from one village to another until we stopped here. I didn't realize how close I was to my former life. At one time I was an idol to its inhabitants, and then I became invisible. So today I went into the store for tea and a cake, as I always did in the mornings. Sometimes they'd let me eat right there and watch TV. That's how I found out about the news in the city and the world. Today there was a report about Christina's death. They said that millionaire Nestorov's wife had died of a heart attack right in the office of the firm Jason's in my firm. Christina's picture was shown close up, and something clicked in my head and I screamed in pain. Her face stirred up everything inside of me as the memory cells filled one by one. The store clerk was startled when I burst into tears right in the sales area. My beloved Christina had died. I couldn't bear the thought, and then I felt inside that I needed to go to the city morgue. I needed to go to the city morgue. I don't know how to explain it. Call it a premonition if you want, but I wasn't wrong. I was sure she was still alive, that I'd make it in time. Val, Harry, and everyone who watched Andrew's testimony was shocked. There was no doubt about it. Even with the appearance of it, it was safe to say that the story was told by a businessman who had disappeared 5 years ago. The story was incredible, even momentous. In one day, Andrew not only was able to remember himself, but also lost his wife, and then saved her from death at the hands of a despicable friend traitor. Soon the whole town was buzzing about the incredible incident. The police remained silent. But journalists got wind of the sensation anyway. The news began to report on the miraculous resurrection, the return of the businessman, and the true identity of his friend. By the time Andrew arrived at the hospital to talk to his beloved, Jason had managed to escape. "I'm not staying here," he muttered. As soon as the police rushed into the morgue, he looked threateningly at Ben and Alex. "What? Got caught up in an obscure scam? If you work our case, you'll regret it, buddy." Recently released from the colony, got his point, and didn't know who to be cocky with, who was better off not putting sticks in their wheels. "Doctor, how is she?" Andrew was only concerned about the state of Christine, who was in no hurry to talk to anyone after what had happened. She had given Russell Davidson a statement and asked not to be disturbed. After the dose of drugs that was administered to the patient, her body has weakened, but the drips will do their job. The other issue is the psychological state. Her mood is volatile now, so be prepared for tears or hysterics. It's not an easy situation, from what I hear, the doctor advised Andrew. He entered the room and froze for a moment. The same clear eyes of his now ex-wife stared openly at him. "Christina, honey, I'm so sorry. I didn't even know." She turned away, unable to bear the sight of the man she betrayed. "I thought you were dead. You were gone. I was a wreck. Jason was there for me. He helped me through my grief and helped me get back on my feet. He was there for me when I couldn't see anyone else. I don't think you can forgive me. I won't forgive myself after this either." "What are you talking about?" Andrew sat down in the chair next to the bed. "You didn't know, did you? You didn't know how sneaky and conniving he is. It's all a plan to eliminate both of us. You're just as much a victim as I am, but I married him. A year after you disappeared, I jumped into marriage." So recklessly, Christina sobbed. Andrew just put his arm around her. We'll get through this. If you still want to be with me." Of course, the ex-spouse's home was surrounded by reporters and cameramen. When was Christina discharged? Jason didn't distinguish himself here either. He didn't even offer Christina a change of residence after her first husband went missing. Jason simply took him out of the picture by taking possession of what once belonged to him. The firm the two young friends had started in the past was now owned by Jason and Christina. "I need to get back to normal. I'm weaned on technology," Andrew warned his beloved. "You gotta catch up. The current specialist is much better versed in our field than I am. It's okay. We'll live. The firm is still in place. Everything is working," Christina consoled him. "You remember, I'm very capable." After Andrew's return, she went to work and involved him in the business. It saved her from the awkwardness of being with her ex-husband in the big quiet house. The past 5 years had changed both of them so much that now their relationship was going through a major crisis. They had breakfasted together, dined together, chatted politely, but did not broach the topics of concern. The police were relentlessly pursuing the sensational case, but Jason had vanished into thin air. He was elusive, vanished without a trace. When the decision was made to freeze his accounts to make it harder for him to get as far away as possible, or even to another country, the following came to light. Jason had thought of several contingencies in advance and transferred all the funds from his account to an offshore account. The authorities had no access to it. That made finding Jason much more difficult. Meanwhile, Christine and Andrew lived under the same roof as strangers. They each had their own burdens, but they were in no hurry to share them. Both were concerned about Jason's fate too. Denise and Jessica dreamed of the moment when he would be caught and brought to justice for all his evil deeds. At times, the ex-spouses spent evenings together, watching movies, talking about detached topics, not touching on the personal. They were afraid they wouldn't be able to catch up. Andrew could hardly believe that now they lived as if they were strangers. One night at dinner, Christine shared her worries. 5 years ago, we were newlyweds, made plans, and then fate broke everything for us. Can we get it back? For the first time in weeks of living with her, Andrew dared to take her hand without permission. My darling, just remember how it all began. Can't we do this anymore? Did everything inside us die when I was a vagabond and didn't even remember you? I still longed for you. I was in a lot of pain, not physically without you, but being separated from you hit me hard. They spent that evening sitting in each other's arms. Andrew and Christine took their time. They didn't want to scare away the trust that had been rekindled between them. The former couple reminisced about the moment they met. You had just graduated from the institute. Your eyes were burning. You had a red diploma in your hands. Andrew recalled with admiration. I even remember what you were wearing then. Yes, they didn't want to take me anywhere, Christina nodded. During my internship, I did very well. I was recommended to several firms, but none of them dared to take me to the States. I was counting on you so much. As a young company, your demands couldn't have been too high. When I saw you two lanky, self-assured businessmen, she began. Overconfident about what? Andrew resented her with feigned resentment. You should have seen yourself then, all self-important, though only 2 years older than me. I knew I had to wave my hair and flap my eyes at you, Christine laughed. And when you saw me in action, I never underestimated you, Andrew said. Of course, you impressed me with your looks, but without your knowledge, the firm would not have become so successful so quickly. You have helped us a lot, and you deserve to be the CEO. Andrew had had a difficult time in his previous career. He was once again a respected, wealthy man who didn't need anything, but he realized how far behind modern professionals were, regardless of his pride. He took a business course that covered the latest trends in the world of business and social media. We have a whole department dedicated to this, Christina explained to Andrew with a satisfied look as she took him around the office. 70% of purchases are made online, and the number of customers has increased due to delivery. Yes, everything has changed, Andrew nodded without regret. I'm jealous that I wasn't involved in every new phase. I'd like to see you grow. But Andrew had plenty to be sad about. The employees who worked at the company under Jason and Christina could only hear how clever Andrew is. They learned more from the news when he was reported missing. The boss's ex-husband had miraculously returned. Everyone expected incredible solutions, new breakthrough ideas from him, but they were disappointed. Andrew, understand, these are people of a different generation. They are younger, and they're tech-savvy, Christina told him. You can be angry all you want, but your courses are nothing if you refuse to put knowledge into practice. We got rid of the old methods a long time ago. You have to accept that. I know Andrew admitted his mistakes. Even the junior staff look at me like I'm an ancient man. I'm trying to be someone they can count on. I want to do business wisely, but I need to get used to it. But it wasn't just the situation at Beloved's firm that Andrew was worried about. The results of Christina's blood tests, which were conducted to detect the presence of poison in her blood, made him nervous. Ever since his return, he had suspected there was something Christina wasn't telling him. Christina, I'm done. I can't guess what's going on inside of you anymore, he said one day in the office. He didn't have the energy to wait until he got home. Christine had turned pale. It was clear she was caught off guard. What you're about to hear could throw you off balance, she warned and lowered her eyes. My blood test showed. You weren't poisoned, were you? They were clean? Andrew couldn't help himself and apologized immediately. No, that's not it. Anyway, I'm pregnant with Jason's baby, of course. I didn't know how to tell you that. Andrew was silent for a moment, sighed, and then spoke. You were his already. Were you planning a family? I don't have anything to blame you for. The baby was in no way to blame, Andrew said confidently. He saw no reason at all to keep such wonderful news from him. I was afraid it would alienate you. We're already very careful with each other, and I'm so tired of living in constant tension. Well, don't. It's not good for the baby. Andrew sat down on Christina's desk and put his arm around her. I'm not going anywhere else. No one will bake me. And this baby is ours, no one else's. He himself wouldn't be happy with a father like Jason. Christina couldn't hold back the tears. She had held in all the excitement for so long that it didn't take long for relief to set in. She and Andrew would be a family again. They would have a baby just like they had once dreamed of. I'm definitely going to have to get over my pride now, Andrew said, rocking Christina in his arms. I'm not going to let you sit in the office this long. You'll rest at home. There are various useful goodies, but I will not lock you up and work remotely, of course, but you have taken on too much. The employees are relaxed. I recognize your grip now, laughed Christina, wiping tears. The whole truth was known, and she was no longer afraid of being rejected. Andrew remained just as sensitive, caring, and attentive. We're going to have a family. I wanted my baby so badly, and now we will. Thank you for taking us in. Over the next few months, Andrew never ceased to amaze Christina. He shrunk his ego and began to adopt the experience of the new staff to fit in. Soon he was to take on the role of head of the firm because Christina had to take care of her health. She, of course, filed for divorce, and the former spouses modestly signed after that in the registry office. At the time of Andrew's return, journalists did not stop following them on their heels, so the newlyweds acted cautiously. They hid Christina's pregnancy, and bodyguards did not allow reporters to approach near the house in search of another sensation. Sooner or later, they will realize everything and will trumpet the child. Christina reassured her husband. Soon I won't be able to hide my tummy. You are overreacting. It's what they do for a living. Oh, it seems to me that soon I will have a 10-meter fence around the house. Andrew pretended that he had not heard anything. He was annoyed by other people's interference in their lives. Besides, he didn't want Jason, wherever he was, celebrating about the baby. Andrew's only dream was to keep his family safe from intruders. Next to him, Christina felt at ease. She began to trust Andrew more. The same tenderness that had driven them crazy a few years ago had returned. You've become too tense, she said, rubbing his shoulders. I don't know how you manage. You've changed a lot, and that makes me happy. Andrew proudly accepted the praise from his wife's lips, putting the family's well-being first. He found the strength to manage the firm. In just 3 months, he had to absorb a lot of new information, find an approach to the team, and take away some of Christine's worries. Now she was in the office much less often, but she held conferences with the staff via video link. And soon Andrew faced massive dissatisfaction from his subordinates. Andrew Johnson, things are not looking good. The complaints about the pay cuts are increasing every day, said his deputy. I know the situation. Jason has let us down, funding has been cut dramatically, but employees haven't gotten their paychecks for months. Our market position is down. Everyone's working their asses off to get back up, and they're not being rewarded for it. Yes, I admit it. I've long preferred to ignore our real prospects, he agreed with his deputy Samuel Adamson. So, Samuel, we need to downsize. I can't afford this kind of staff at the moment. Approve the application of those who wish to leave. We'll work with those who are committed, and I'll make sure they get a decent salary. It's fairer that way. Christina was as supportive as she could be of her husband. She hoped the police would find Jason and bring him to justice. After all, he had absconded with money that didn't belong to him alone. But as the months passed, there was no decisive news from law enforcement. Andrew returned home more and more irritable. The only thing that could calm him down was the thought of his developing son in Christine's belly. She was tireless. She didn't want to quit her job and often sat with her laptop until her husband came home and scolded her. Honey, well, soon the baby will appear, he said, and you can't take your eyes off the screen. Come on, Christine replied. I'm a businesswoman after all. It was as if Andrew had predicted the birth of little Peter. The baby wanted to be born that very night. Christine felt the sheet beneath her was wet. Andrew, she pushed her husband with panic in her voice. Andrew, wake up. I think it started. An anxious Christina was brought to the hospital by ambulance. Andrew was so worried that he was afraid to drive himself. The thought of his wife's agony was driving him out of his mind. Please sign, he hurried the paramedic as he and his partner loaded Christine onto the gurney. Andrew, don't tell them what to do. They know what to do, Christine said. Andrew paced the hallway of the delivery room. He couldn't understand why Christine was so much calmer than he was. It was scary to imagine what she was really going through. She must have prepared herself for labor, because she often repeated how she wanted to be free from the belly as soon as possible. And a powerless Christine forgot herself in a blissful sleep as the nurses moved her to a separate room for newborns. In the morning, when it was time to feed her son, the young mother was waiting for another blow. What do you mean? What do you mean, Peter? No, you are something mixed up. She did not understand the first time demandingly. Looking at the nursing staff, do you mean to say that you lost my baby? Are you crazy? It's impossible. Andrew rushed to the maternity hospital as soon as he received the alarm call from his wife. The police also arrived on the scene immediately. Doctors and midwives scurried around the ward, but could not retrieve the lost baby out of thin air. So Dana, who worked here on the night shift, is missing. Val clarified to Harry, questioning all the staff. Find her right now. I'll have you all locked up, Christina yelled at everyone. She did not give in to despair and tears, but frightened the whole maternity ward to keep them in the seats. Honey, you need to calm down. You're still too weak. Andrew tried to put her to bed, but her spouse refused to do nothing. He used all his connections to engage the necessary forces to find the newborn. Dana's not at home, Russell Davidson shared with his partner. Neighbors say they haven't seen her this morning or heard her crying. She has a house in Kuzminki, answered Dana's colleague Elena, who was called to replace the runaway employee. She inherited it from her grandfather. Did you know? We leave immediately. Val nodded to Harry. Russell. We know the address. We'll find out on the way. We need to find out about her relatives. Who was she seeing? Maybe this guy took the baby somewhere and stole it without thinking about the consequences. Or maybe he planned this whole thing a long time ago. That was absolutely no consolation to Andrew and Christina. Dana didn't hear when 2 police cars pulled up to her wooden house. She was too absorbed in the screaming of Peter, who didn't want to eat the mixture despite his intense hunger. Hush, hush, Dana rocked him in her tired arms. We need to be patient for a while. Soon he will come for you. You have not been abandoned, don't be afraid. Dana Vlasova, immediately leave the house with the child, came a stern male voice into the horn. Dana knew she had no escape route, for her accomplice had not yet appeared. How had she trusted him so much? Dana, I repeat, come out with the baby, Russell Davidson's voice urged. Relieve yourselves now. Dana wrapped Peter in a blanket and opened the front door with one hand out in front of her. I'm unarmed, she shouted, and an operative immediately ran up to her and took the infant. I didn't do anything to him. I wasn't going to, she said through tears as she was forced to put her hands behind her back and handcuffed. Back at the station, a relieved Dana spilled the beans. Jason Nestorov, my lover. We'd been together for over a year. I knew he was married, but he said the passion between them was long gone, that they lived like strangers. But it was Dana who told me. Were you planning on kidnapping a child to raise together? Yeah, no, I don't know. Jason freaked out when he found out Christina was pregnant. Even though she'd gotten back together with her ex-husband, Jason had it all figured out. The baby's definitely his. He's got a lot of people he knows around town or owes money to. Knew when Christina's pregnancy was established, he never wanted kids. At least he never discussed it with me. I thought it was too early to plan a family, so I didn't ask. And Jason always struck me as a free spirit. I was surprised that he'd gotten so caught up in the idea of taking the baby for himself, and I couldn't help but help him. He was always persuasive, Dana admitted to her shame. You know, he's the kind of man who knows how to find the right words to get his way. It's always happened to me. And now it's going to teach me a lesson. I could go to jail if you give us his exact location. Maybe you'll get probation. Russell took a good look at Dana. I don't know where he's gone. Believe me, I'm not covering for him. Jason always does what he wants and doesn't answer to anyone. He's got his own thing going on, maybe illegal, and he always told me it was best not to get involved. Christina was ready to strangle Dana with her own hands, the one who put their son in danger. When you find that bastard, he'll answer for everything she told Val Harry, who had returned the baby to her and told her about the midwife's role in the case. He won't be able to get away with it. For double attempted murder, grand larceny, tax fraud, and child theft, he's going away for the rest of his life. Thank you. Andrew shook the policeman's hand. And please find him as soon as possible. We'd like to know that our boy is safe. Yes, and I'm worried. No matter how hard the police try. But the surveillance of Dana's village home had no success. Jason had probably seen the police cars and the commotion that had engulfed the village, so he didn't even go near the place where he hoped to meet his kidnapped son. But Christine and Andrew received good news, Russell Davidson told them. His accounts have been frozen, so now he cannot use them, no matter how hard he tries. And we know he's in our state. And his lack of money will prevent him from hiding well and traveling freely. Thank you, Christina replied. Please keep us informed. She was more comfortable with personal guards and police patrols on duty outside their home for security. When are we going to have a quiet life, Christina sighed. My little one. She looked at her son. I'll never hurt you. We won't. Andrew touched the little nose with his finger and kissed his wife. Anyway, we have to move on with our lives and raise our baby. Andrew continued to drive to the office every day, but often called home and asked Christina to show him his son. Congratulations, shouted his staff at the firm. May your baby grow up healthy for the happiness of his parents. And this is to your family from us, Amber, who kept the office clean, handed the director a basket with various badges and creams for the baby. Thank you so much, friends. This is new to us, so don't be surprised if I come in even more tired than before, Andrew said. The co-workers dispersed to their seats. Andrew made a few calls to organize a small banquet during lunch and treat his subordinates in honor of Peter's birthday. But a few days later, the irreparable happened. Andrew was sure he was among the last to leave the office. He saw Amber on the way out, finishing up with cleaning up the last rooms. See you tomorrow, Andrew, she said with a smile as she walked past. See you tomorrow. Amber, he didn't bother setting the alarm. He knew the cleaning lady would take care of that when she was done. He had only had time to drive away from work for a few minutes when he got a call about a fire. No way, he ahead and called the fire department. He was the first one outside the firm's building and ran inside. Andrew was sure Amber hadn't left yet and the building was already engulfed in flames. Amber, Andrew shouted. Call out. We need to get out now. The whole place is on fire. Amber, where are you? But the girl didn't respond. Amber had passed out because she was too close to the back room where the fire had started. Andrew didn't bother to expend any energy to put out the fire, though the thought that he might lose the building in the fire prevented sober thinking. Amber was saved at the cost of the burns on Andrew's face. He felt no pain due to shock, but Christina, who arrived at the scene of the fire, screamed when she saw his swollen face and cheek. There were burns on Andrew's body as well, but they could at least be hidden under his clothes. After being hospitalized and discharged from the hospital, Andrew became despondent. He couldn't look at his disfigured face and didn't want to show his son his face. He shouldn't see me like this. I'm scaring him, he fumbled with Peter. When Christina wanted to give him a baby, she would say, "Honey, don't push him away. He feels like you're his daddy and he needs you." But Andrew was hard to argue with. Having lost his office in the fire, he didn't know what to do next, and his life was failing again. He'd missed out on his life's work when things were just starting to get better again. "We'll try again," Christina reassured him, stroking his hair. "We're both specialists, after all, except we don't have the money. We can't spend all our savings on starting from scratch. We have a child. We can't jeopardize his future. We have to be sober and live within our means." Andrew had to use a mask to appear in public. His appearance made others morbidly curious, and some even yelled or turned away with a look of distaste on their faces. Andrew managed to get a job in the office of a large company and worked hard for several months to prove his professionalism. He was now an ordinary employee, not a manager. Together with Christina, they loved to spend time with their son, tried to devote every free minute to him. But Peter's mother did not stay at home for long and gave him to a kindergarten. And he also got a job. Andrew no longer neglected his child and eventually came to terms with the way he looked. Peter adored his parents, always reaching out to them. The 3-year-old was inquisitive and made friends easily at daycare. Amber invited us to visit Christina, informed her husband. After Andrew rescued his former co-worker, she kept coming over to thank them and sometimes sat with Peter when both his parents were busy with work. "I'm glad she met a decent man." And as like a mom herself now, Andrew smiled contentedly. You and she had become great friends. You could say we're kin now. After all, events like this bring you closer together. The years went by. With each day Peter was born. Andrew and Christine wondered where time flew so fast. "Here you are already a schoolboy," Christine cried after her son's first lineup, squatting in front of him. "You've gotten so big, Mom." "Don't cry," Peter wiped her tears with his warm palms. "There's a lot to be happy about. I'm going to grow up soon. I'll start earning a lot of money so I can give Daddy an operation." He's embarrassed about his scars. "You, my attentive boy," his mother hugged him. Unfortunately, the amiable Peter became the subject of bullying by the children at school. They saw Andrew, who always walked the streets with his head down and covered by the collar of his coat or jacket. "Your dad's a freak. Your daddy's a freak," the bullies teased Peter. "My parents call him Quasimodo," another goofy boy chuckled. "You don't call him that." "My dad's not scary," Peter defended his father, barely holding back tears of resentment. But his frustration only fueled the little brawlers more. "I'm going to go to school and make all the parents ashamed of raising their children," Andrew raged when he learned that his son was being teased again because of his scars. "But aren't they ashamed? Don't they know the pain they're causing him? Should we go together?" Christina suggested. "If neither the vice principal nor the class teacher will do anything about it, we'll find other ways. I'm sick of seeing my son in tears all the time, too." "It's all because of me." Andrew sat down on the couch, wrapping his arms around his head. He thought it was his fault that Peter was being bullied at school. "Don't you dare even think that," Christina declared. "We need to get all the parents together with the kids to explain to them how you got those scars. Peter needs to know that his dad Jason is a hero. He sacrificed his business, his health, and his looks to save another man's life. But who would do something like that? I'm guessing not many." "No need to change the hero," Andrew immediately echoed. The burns he had received had made him even more humble. More often than not in society, he wanted to be the most inconspicuous person. But Christina knew how honorable, honest, and decent her husband was. "Why should you, Peter, suffer for these ignoramuses?" "No, I won't let them bully you, not him." Christina still insisted and in front of the entire class told off the very bullies who were mocking her family. But the effect of her fiery speech was short-lived. Now they weren't taunting Peter on school grounds, but harassing him on the bus on the way home. Son of Quasimodo, Joel, who was sitting 2 seats down, said loudly to Peter, "Next, you freak. I'm addressing you." "Get off," Peter responded angrily. "So the dunce is hiding behind his mom's skirt. And his father didn't even show up for school," said the other bully. And they both laughed. Peter sat there, burning with shame. He realized that the adult passengers had heard everything, but no one even thought of standing up for him. At the next stop, when most of the people got off, Joel and Jack sat closer to Peter and started shoving him in the shoulder. "But where's your hero, Daddy? Then he won't protect you," the driver, who could now hear the mocking talk of the first graders, couldn't stand their insolence, and at the next stop made his way into the cabin. "What are you little kids picking on the kid for? Would I have to drop you off at full throttle?" His voice sounded menacing, so Peter's assailants immediately fell silent. "How can you threaten other people's children?" An elderly female passenger raised her voice. "You better ask why their parents aren't involved in their upbringing, unwilling to listen to the moralizing," Joel and Jack exclaimed goodbye outside. Peter exhaled with relief. "All right?" the driver asked him. "Yes, fine," Peter replied softly. "Thank you very much. They're always picking on me." "Get in the front seat, we'll chat," the man waved at him, returning to his seat. "What's your name?" "I'm Peter Nestorov," the man replied without a backward glance. "Nestorov. What's your mom's name?" The driver's voice changed. "Christina." Do you know or Peter didn't notice that the bus driver had fallen silent due to his attempts to suppress unsolicited tears? After all, he didn't just know Peter's mother, he was his own father. Jason had been leading the life of an ordinary man for several years now, but not because all his funds had been frozen by the police. The reason was different. The birth of his son had changed him. He clearly realized that Andrew would be a better father to the boy than he was, and his final act of revenge was the firm that the former friends had started together many years ago. In that moment, after learning that he had almost taken Andrew and Amber's lives with his own hands, Jason realized how low he had sunk. He was scared of himself. He was someone's father now, lying, vindictive, selfish. Could such a man be responsible for someone, be a role model? Jason was shocked to see his son, because he wanted to lay low and never be seen by him again. Let Peter grow up with loving parents who could give him a good upbringing. But now Jason realized that he had seen Peter before, that the boy was always coming home by this route. "Uncle, are you all right?" inquired the kid when it was his turn to come out. He sent the card to the machine and looked at the adult carefully. "Yeah, kid, don't worry. My allergies are acting up. That's what the tears are about. Take care of yourself." You don't let it hurt. Jason dared to ruffle his son's hair. In that moment, he felt as tender as he had ever felt before. Peter walked off the bus with a smile, leaving a completely lost Jason behind. No more bullies harassed Peter on the bus. They were less likely to pick on him at school, having chosen a new harmless target for their constant bullying. Now Peter came home from school in high spirits. He really liked the driver he had befriended. Entering the bus, the boy immediately stopped beside Jason. They talked quietly. "You have very beautiful drawings. Your victory in the contest is well deserved," he praised his son. "I used to like to draw when I was a kid too. I haven't tried it in a while." "It's a lot of fun," nodded Peter with a smile. "From next year I'll also go swimming." The friendship between Peter and Jason developed on its own. His father enjoyed every second he spent with his son and was glad that no one teased him anymore. Peter complained to him about why he was being picked on. "Mom says it's nasty," Peter candidly said. "My dad pulled a man out of a fire. Can you believe that?" He didn't wait for the firemen. He went into the flames himself. That's why he's scarred. Jason was hurt to hear that Peter and his family had suffered because of his terrible act. He often wanted to repent to his son, to tell him that it had ruined his dad and mom's life for a long time. But he couldn't take it out on the kid. If he confessed, Peter would hate him and they'd never see each other again. "So you made friends with the bus driver?" Christina asked her son. "Yes, he's very nice." Shutting up Jack and Joel, Peter happily shared. "I'll show him to you now." He reached into the phone's gallery. "I took a video of him driving the bus." Christina gasped and almost dropped her son's phone from her hands. She could clearly see her ex-husband. Panic gripped her. Jason had gotten close to Peter. God knows what he was up to. "Jesus, son," she shrieked. "Honey, what are you doing?" Andrew looked over her shoulder and froze. "Peter, is this your friend?" "Yes," the son said warily. He didn't understand why Dad and Mom were so tense. "Let's go to the police." Now, Christina said in her husband's ear, "I won't let him anywhere near me. He's definitely up to something," nodded a worried Andrew. The police worked quickly and arrested Jason. That same evening, his meeting with Andrew and Christine took place in the hallway of the department. "Forget about Peter. You'll never see him again. You bastard." Andrew grabbed him by his jacket and shook him. "I admit everything. Everything. Just let us communicate," Jason pleaded. The couple looked at each other, and their mutual enemy had changed visibly. His appearance alone suggested that he was truly grieving the crime he'd committed. "Peter is the only good thing I have left. I'm happy to have him," Christina said firmly. "As long as he wants to hang out with you." She and Andrew hated Jason with all their hearts, but they weren't going to lie to Peter because he had grown attached to his own father. Jason's trial was months away because the lawyer had to work up a sweat to try to build a defense for several violent crimes at once. Peter asked to be in the courtroom with his parents. "Are you sure?" Christina was worried. She and Andrew had agreed that they wouldn't turn their son against Jason. He'd be behind bars for at least 20 years anyway. "Lady, Jason's uncle's going to be charged. But he's got to have one family member." As expected, Jason was sentenced to 17 years. Andrew thought the sentence was too short to cover the atrocities he had calculatedly committed. Peter cried when Jason looked at him after the verdict was announced. He waved at his son, but couldn't muster a carefree smile. "Don't be afraid, son." Christine pressed him to her side and stroked his cheek. "Will you be able to write him letters?" "Maybe I'll see you when you're older," Andrew whispered. The couple knew that Peter knew the difference between right and wrong, and they didn't want to shame him for wanting to keep in touch with his own father. After the trial, Jason's account was frozen, and the money that belonged to Andrew and Christina returned to the family, and they were back in possession of their income. "Well, we can finally let you have these transactions." Christina jumped on her spouse and kissed him. "Oh my God, won't I ever feel those looks again?" Andrew exhaled, still not believing his happiness. It took a few treatments to make his face and body look the same as before, but almost. "You look different," Christine eyed her husband curiously. "You have a new husband now," he laughed and hugged her. "Daddy, and I love you. I love you." Peter added and joined his parents' embrace. It doesn't matter to me at all, Andrew said. The couple hadn't realized for almost 8 years that they couldn't keep up, so they decided to invest in a new business, doing business for their own pleasure. Jason was no longer chasing any heights. Christina, why don't we get into furniture? My father made everything with his own hands. I helped him a lot in the workshop, and I was pretty good at it before I started Jason's business. I even worked in a furniture factory and learned a few things, and then maybe we'll start our own company. We'll make custom, exclusive furniture. Why? The idea is interesting, Christina nodded. Just need to study the issue better and try it. While we have not invested anywhere, we can do different things and decide, said Christina. The couple decided to stop at the production of furniture, rented a room, bought equipment. They trained themselves and hired experienced craftsmen. Social networks did their job. And soon Christina and Andrew Johnson took orders from the first customers. The feedback on their burgeoning venture was flattering, and orders started coming in regularly. I've been thinking of a few ways to attract customers, Christina said. See when you're free, Christina handed her husband the list. She wasn't often involved in the furniture making process, and was more involved in social media or painting pieces. Easiest job ever, Andrew Johnson teased his wife. To which Christina playfully showed him her tongue, sitting with a paintbrush. After a year and a half of hard work in the workshop, the couple could not say that they tried in vain. They had recruited a staff of professionals who handled multiple orders every day to the delight of their customers. I think we deserve a vacation, Christina once declared after a day of work, collapsing on the living room couch. Me too, Peter shouted, plopping down next to his mom. I finished with straight A's. Well, then I'll just have to take my laborers to the sea, laughed Andrew Johnson. The family went on vacation with Amber's family. The company sprawled out in luxurious rooms, and in the evening did not sit on the beach in the cool seawater. Went on excursions, tried out sea rides, and even scuba dived. Val Harry is your good boy. So talented and hardworking, Christina smiled at her friend. Yeah, I sure got married well, Amber laughed. I used to scrub floors in the office. Now I can afford a vacation at a resort like this. The week of vacation enjoyed by both families had added to their energy and strength, with some surprises behind them. Christina felt sick in the workshop when one of the handymen was heating up lunch in the microwave. Oh my God, what is that horrible smell? Annie clamped her hands over her mouth, realizing she was about to turn inside out. Christine, are you all right? Samuel Adamson, the foreman who was waiting for her outside the restroom, addressed her. I don't know what to say, Christine said, and rushed to the stall again. When she returned a couple minutes later, she said, I remember how my first pregnancy started. It looks like she's the one. Well, congratulations, Samuel Adamson brightened, hugging her gently. Thank you. But we need to make sure. Just please don't say a word to anyone. I want Andrew Johnson to be the first to know. Well, almost first. Christina quietly told this exciting news to her husband. Upon hearing it, he looked at her with delight. Good girl, you're mine. He leaned down to her tummy and kissed through her shirt. Andrew, I'm almost 40. Do you think we can make it? Christina asked fearfully. It will definitely work out. My good one. Absolutely, he hugged his wife gently, feeling like the happiest man in the world. The working day in the company was over. Alex Smith, having switched off the computer, went down to the underground guarded garage of his own firm. There he was waiting for a new premium class car, which the young businessman had bought only a month ago. Great car, Alex thought to himself as he drove out of the garage into the street. On such a car, one is not ashamed to come to a meeting with foreign partners. This car still inspires respect. Alex recently turned 30, and he celebrated his anniversary with an incredible scale. He rented the most expensive restaurant in the city for the evening and invited a lot of guests. The fun lasted until the morning, so that this day he himself and his mates will remember for a long time. Smith drove quickly to the motorway. There was almost no traffic at that time. The businessman easily reached his luxurious cottage in about 15 to 20 minutes. On the threshold of the house, he was already met by Trinity, his fiancée. Are you punctual as always, my love? The girl kissed the groom on the cheek. And I've just baked your favorite spinach pies. Come in, wash your hands, and come to the table. Alex lightly embraced Trinity and smiled politely. They were to be married in just a month, so the bride spent all her free time supervising the organization of all wedding processes, from the choice of location for the photo shoot to the color of napkins and balloons. The wedding promised to be very lush and loud. The Smith family even gave a note about this event in the press, say, come all who know the bride or groom, or just want to express their respect and wish the couple all the best in their new life together. Alex's fate could be called perfect, if not for one, but in fact, he did not really want to go to such a responsible step. He was pushed by his own parents, who saw Trinity as a perfect match for their son. "Alex, sweetheart, you don't worry," his mother, Mrs. Vanessa, told him. "Trinity is a very good girl. Thanks to her parents, our position in the market will only get even stronger. You know, the Brown family is one of the most influential in printing and design. They will give us access to their own facilities, and that will be very good for our company." "Yes, son, listen to what your mother says," Mr. Carl agreed with her with a laugh. "Father, believe me, it is not good for men to think in such a matter. A marriage of convenience is the sure way to a happy married life. Mrs. Vanessa and I know that." Mr. Carl gave him a meaning smile and a wink, but his wife only grinned briefly. She knew perfectly well that if she did not marry the stroppy son now, and with the benefit of the family business, it would only get worse. And Alex, who was always by nature a proud and willful boy, nevertheless accepted his parents' choice. He understood, at his age, many of the world-famous businessmen had already got families and children. He had to think first of all about the continuation of the family, that the presence of a wife and heirs will help him to strengthen his own position in the business environment. And in this respect, Trinity turned out to be quite an acceptable option. She was beautiful, sweet, educated. In addition, his parents knew the Browns for a long time, and Trinity, in truth, was the first candidate for the role of his future wife. The girl herself was not against such a marriage at all. She liked Alex for a long time. She really wanted to marry him. Alex hoped that in time their sympathy would probably grow into something more, and if they would not become passionate lovers, they would at least respect each other. That would be enough for the young businessman. The Smith family owned a large furniture and door hardware business. The business was profitable. The spouses had been engaged in it for many years. But now the parents felt it was time to put the management of the company in the hands of their only son, so that he could bring a fresh creative eye and the latest trends in the field to their empire. Alex, who up to this point had mostly had only a superficial acquaintance with his family's business, found himself somewhat shocked at the scale of the business he was now to manage. Previously, most of his life had been spent partying with friends and courting beautiful girls. But now everything has changed, and the young man had to grow up sharply, as his parents, already being at a rather respectable age, dreamed of finally having a holiday themselves, passing their child into the safe hands of their son. And so the young businessman was preparing for the wedding, at the same time continuing to manage the business, when a strange event happened in his life. Once a fortnight before the celebration, Alex received a very unusual letter by mail. The thing was, the letter turned out to be stamped with the stamp of a regional prison. What the hell is that? He wondered to himself and locked himself in the bathroom so he could print it out and read it quietly away from prying eyes. In the letter, a certain Marion was informing Alex that he had 3 wonderful sons. 3. Not only that, but Marion had given birth to them in the colony. So now, unless he intended to participate in any way in their lives and upbringing, she was going to sue him for child support. To say that Alex was shocked when he read the letters to say nothing. "What the hell is this?" he muttered under his breath. "What children? What is this woman even writing about?" He ran his hand over his face, as if he wanted to wipe away any trace of worry and anxiety. "Okay, the most important thing now is that Trinity doesn't find out about this stupidity," Alex said out loud to himself. "It's probably some kind of evil prank. A joke to ruin the mood of me and my fiancée before the wedding." Deciding so, the young man tore the letter into 4 pieces and, stuffing it deeper into his pocket, walked out of the bathroom. "Honey, are you all right?" Trinity inquired in a concerned tone. "I saw you got some mail. I hope it's nothing bad." Alex made a sort of smile on his face, but it didn't work very well. Trinity immediately realized something was wrong with her fiancé. No, what is it, my love?" the man quickly muttered. "It's all right, just a routine business mailing. Nothing serious." "And don't they send that sort of thing by email?" the bride asked doubtfully. Alex tried to guffaw, saying that his partners were the ones who stayed true to the old traditions and liked to send paper letters. Only Trinity didn't really believe it. "What? Does he take me for a fool or what?" the girl thought to herself. I didn't spend 5 years in Canada studying psychology to be fooled like this. I'm actually very hungry. The groom hastened to change the subject. And I thought you said you had something extremely delicious tonight. Can I taste it? And Alex smiled at her again, but it came out extremely fake. Sure, honey, she pretended to believe his excuses. The roast is waiting for you in the kitchen. All evening, Trinity behaved like a model wife. But as soon as they went to bed, she jumped into the kitchen on the pretext of thirst and immediately rushed to the rubbish bin, where, as she noticed, Alex had thrown the remains of the letter, pulling out all 4 halves. The girl folded them and read with horror about some Marion and her children. The businessman's fiancée was far from stupid, and that's why she realized at once that it smelled of treason. Jealousy gripped Trinity's heart, and she hardly waited until morning to tell her fiancé everything that had accumulated in her soul over the past night. "Why don't you tell me about your mistress Marion?" she asked angrily, looking at Alex. He was just pouring coffee into his cup when he saw his disgruntled fiancé in the kitchen doorway. Trinity folded her arms across her chest and looked determined to get the truth out of her fiancé. "What mistress? He didn't understand at first. You must be confused about something, sweetheart." Then Alex remembered the letter and immediately turned pale. Here, his fiancée nodded at him. "Not only did you decide to have some woman on the side, but she also managed to have a baby in prison. Alex, do you realize what a shame this is for me?" Trinity's eyes were burning wildly. But Alex was just confused, not knowing what to say to the accusation. He had absolutely no idea who this Marion was, nor did he know why she had written to this particular address. Surely it must be some mistake. The rich man tried to reassure her. There's little to know what those poor sissies have in mind. Maybe she made it all up in the first place, and there are no children there at all. "You'd better be right," the bride wagged her finger at him, "because if I find out you're lying to me, and even on the eve of the wedding, I'm going to be very, very disappointed in you, Alex." Trinity left the kitchen, throwing her long red hair over her shoulder irritably, emphasizing her displeasure with the intonation of her fiancé's name. No matter how rich her fiancé was, she hadn't found herself on the streets either, and she wouldn't tolerate any children in their home. Alex only exhaled a sigh of relief then, feeling the storm had passed. The man quietly finished his coffee and got ready for work. He didn't know who had sent him that damned letter, and to be honest, he didn't want to find out. The businessman hoped that the situation would resolve itself like a bad dream. However, he was very much mistaken. About a week after the incident, someone rang the bell at the gate of Alex and his fiancée's house. Alex was going to go to the atelier for a fitting that day to check how his wedding suit would fit him. When he opened the gate, to his amazement, he saw a young, attractive woman in fancy clothes on the threshold. She was holding on to the handle of a spacious pram containing 3 adorable babies. The stunned businessman could only ask in a weak voice, "Who are you? What do you want?" The woman looked at him sullenly, then quietly interjected, "Are you the one asking me who I am? Do you even have a conscience, William?" Alex shook his head negatively. "You must be mistaken. I'm not William. My name is Alex Smith, and I'm sorry I don't know you at all." The eyebrows on the woman's face rose upwards in surprise. "Ah, that's it. He doesn't know. So how to fill my head with romantic nonsense so everything is fine, but how to bear responsibility, to bring up children so he doesn't know me. You've got yourself a good job, I see." "Calm down, please," Alex asked her. "My fiancée is at home. She can hear you." "That's fine. Let her hear you." The guest shouted back as loudly as possible. "What did you think? Change your name so I won't find you. The whole capital is buzzing about your wedding with that woman. I'm not stupid either. I saw an article in the newspaper about your fiancé. You found yourself a rich girl, William, beautiful as a picture." "What's the matter?" Trinity came up to them at that moment. She had already heard the loud cries in the courtyard and had therefore hurried to her fiancé. The visitor looked at the bride with undisguised hatred. "And good luck to you too, beautiful," she said in a mocking tone, and bowed jokingly to Trinity. "But here, you see, we are having a small talk with your fiancé. I have borne him children, these very ones." Marion nodded at the triplets, and he won't recognize me. He's hiding from me. Even changed his name. He's so afraid. Trinity stared at Alex in shock, but he felt the same way. He was definitely seeing the woman standing in front of him for the first time in his life. Is it true what she says? His fiancée asked him with tears in her eyes. No, I swear to you. The businessman shook his head. I don't know her at all, and I don't understand what's going on here. It's some kind of circus. It was here that the young man finally realized who was in front of him. Wait, so you're Marion? You're the one who wrote the other day. The woman grinned briefly and wickedly. Wow, you deign to remember my name. Yes, I am Marion, and these are your children, you wretched scoundrel. I did 8 months in prison, pregnant by you, by the way. That's when our children were born. I was released on parole. Thank God I didn't have a very heavy sentence. So they had mercy on a single mother with many children. My God, what a horror, was all Trinity could exclaim. Spurred on by anger and resentment, she asked her fiancé, "And you're still going to claim you knew nothing about her? How could you?" It seemed to Alex that his head was about to explode from this absurdity. There were groundless accusations coming at him from both sides. It was clear that this Marion thought he was the father of her children. But that certainly could never be. Look here, why don't we go into the house? I'll get the housekeeper to make you some hot tea, and I'm sure we can sort it all out. Just let's stop shouting in the middle of the street. Be that as it may, Alex's upbringing prevented him from chasing this poor woman off the doorstep. He was determined to sort things out, and he felt sorry for her children, who were certainly not to blame. Marion hesitated, but then agreed and went into the house. The triplets began to worry. The mother realized they were hungry. The housekeeper took the woman to a separate room where she could feed the children in peace, while she brewed aromatic herbal tea for the guests. One thing I don't understand, Alex, when did you have time to go left? Trinity hissed angrily to the businessman before anyone could hear. Seems like you've been at work all day, tired, and you've only spent the night with me. I can't believe you could flatter that redneck. Alex looked at her with a grim look. I'm telling you for the 100th time, honey, I didn't cheat on you. This is a mistake, but I'm going to try to find out why that woman thinks that. The bride looked at him skeptically. Do you think I'm really going to believe your words after all this? Alex had no intention of continuing this argument, especially since Marion had already come out to join them in the kitchen. As she sat at the table, the businessman tried to ask her as correctly as possible. Marion, explain why you are sure that I am the father of your children. The mother of many children looked at him as if she were explaining the simplest truths to an unintelligent child. Who else would it be? Or don't you remember how you first charmed me and had an affair with me and then brazenly set me up? Alex looked at his guest with genuine sympathy. Whatever had happened to this woman, she had clearly been through something terrible. I mean, we worked at that firm together. Remember, I was an accountant, and you made me sign that unfortunate document that put me on the outside. I went to jail for it, and just before the trial, I found out I was expecting your baby. The doctors told me later that I was having triplets, Marion said, barely holding back her tears. She was very hurt that the man she loved so sincerely had betrayed her, and now she didn't even want to admit that he was wrong. Alex looked at Marion carefully and then asked, "Can you tell me the exact name of the company where you worked and the time period you held the position of accountant there?" She nodded and gave all the information she was interested in. Alex nodded then and called the housekeeper over to him. "Mrs. Megan will show you to a room where you can stay with the children. Please try to calm down and rest. In the meantime, I will try to find out what happened to you and your real fiancé." Marion only looked at him in amazement. She hadn't expected Alex to be so involved with her. For the first time, the woman began to wonder if it was really her William in front of her. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "Whoever you are, thank you for not leaving me and my children in distress." As the housekeeper took Marion to the first floor, a furious Trinity burst into the kitchen. "What, are you really determined to keep that girl in our house? You're out of your mind." Alex only raised his hand warningly in response. Hold the heat, honey. I need to find out why it was Marion who mistook me for the father of her children. The story she told is very much true. I just checked on the internet, and the company she was talking about does exist. It's in a neighboring town in the region. I'll go there tomorrow and find out. Trinity wanted to scandalize her fiancé, but thought better of it. There's no telling what's going on. What if there really is some kind of misunderstanding? Then it would appear that she ruined her and Alex's happiness with her own hands. She wanted too much to get married, and had put too much effort into making the upcoming ceremony perfect. And for that matter, she could put up with that boorish Marion and her children for a couple of days. The next morning, the businessman hit the road, arriving in a neighboring town and finding the office, presumably the one he worked in. Alex, a little worried, walked through the door. "Oh, Mr. William," exclaimed the guard cheerfully at the sight of him. "It's been a long time since you visited us. We've lost track of you. How are you? How is your health?" "What about my health?" Alex didn't understand. "But how come?" The security guard lowered his eyes in embarrassment. "You went straight to sick leave after that incident. Only you didn't show up at our place again, so we thought you were seriously ill." The young businessman realized that if he wanted to find out the truth, he would have to play along with the local staff. "Thanks, I'm fine now," he replied evasively. "But can you remind me what floor our office is on? I'm not very good at orientating myself in space after my illness." The guard looked at him in surprise for a moment, but then he said, "It's still the same. We are based on the 6th floor. Nothing has changed in the meantime." Alex thanked him and then proceeded to the indicated floor. There he really found a large open-type office. The mass of employees sat side by side, separated only by plastic partitions, which created a very faint illusion of a separate space. Several people from the general hive immediately caught sight of him and began to wave vigorously at Alex. "Mr. William, you're finally back. How we've missed you," a pretty blonde woman said, embarrassed, as she approached the businessman. "William, darling, isn't it a miracle? Where have you been all this time? Where have you disappeared to?" Some overweight man in glasses asked him, while shaking the businessman desperately by the arm. "Yes, I have. As a matter of fact, look, why do you all call me William?" The people around him immediately fell silent and began to look amongst themselves in surprise. Finally, the blonde replied, "Because you, Mr. William Willis, are our beloved head of sales. Don't you remember anything?" Alex shook his head in surprise. Then the man in glasses continued, "You disappeared from the office a few months ago, just before our head accountant, Marion Johnson's, went to jail. She'd forged some kind of document and stole a few million from the company. And after that, you got sick and disappeared." Alex understood absolutely nothing. How could this be possible if he had been leading his normal life all this time? The only explanation could be that he had a twin brother or a very similar twin. But the latter was most unlikely. Did he really have a twin he knew nothing about? Thanking the staff and getting rid of their persistent curiosity, Alex left the office and went straight to his parents' mansion. He hoped that this conversation would bring him closer to solving the mystery, except that his father and mother were as shocked as he was. "What are you, son? What twin brothers?" Mrs. Vanessa said, perplexed. "You are our only, most favorite child." "Maybe you just misunderstood something," suggested the father. "Sometimes it happens. People are so much alike to each other that under certain circumstances they can be confused. You know, like actors' doppelgangers that they write about in the papers all the time. I think that's exactly your case." A frustrated Alex drove back home. He seemed to realize that if his parents didn't know anything about his hypothetical brother, then therefore he simply didn't exist. However, the businessman's intuition was telling him something different. The man felt that there were too many ambiguities in this story, and most likely his double did not just disappear without a trace. Perhaps something bad had happened to him, and maybe even he needed help. Alex hired a couple of reliable private detectives and started searching. He looked for his doppelganger everywhere he could, in remote villages, hospitals. He even checked all the homeless shelters in the area, but no one had heard of any Mr. William Willis. Desperate, Alex decided to check the nearest morgues, but even there he was rejected. At least now it's clear that he's either alive or really missing, Alex said aloud to himself as he returned from another village where he had been canvassing with one of the detectives. The question invariably plagued him. Where has William, who looks so much like him, gone? It seemed to the young businessman that he was overlooking something, some simple detail that would help him find the clue. Just what that detail was, Alex couldn't figure out yet. Then his attention was attracted by a homeless man who was sitting right by the roadside, begging for alms. The man was holding an old cap with his outstretched hand. Apparently, he was hoping that one of the drivers would stop and help him. But that wasn't what caught Alex's attention. The eyes. The beggar's eyes were exactly the same color and had the same expression as his own. In moments of sadness or longing, Alex looked at himself as if in a mirror, looking at this homeless man. In addition, their hair was almost the same color, except that the beggar's was a little lighter because of the sunburn. "Mate," Alex whistled to him, "can I talk to you for a minute?" The beggar looked at the businessman and stunned. Understandably, Alex's face seemed very familiar to him. After all, it was his own face. The homeless man crossed himself and wanted to run away, but the young businessman managed to stop him. "Oh wait, don't be afraid. I won't hurt you," Alex said out of breath when he finally managed to catch up with the beggar. "Why should I?" the man asked him rudely. "I know a lot of people on the motorway who can stand up for me." "You misunderstood me," Alex interjected with a smile. "What sacrifice? I'm not a cultist or a demon, and I'm not looking for people for organs either. I'm just a man who realized he'd found his own brother." Although William's face was overgrown with a thick beard and his long hair was badly tangled, it was undoubtedly him. Alex persuaded the poor man to get into the car, promising to take him to a good cafe so he could have a full meal. Alex explained the whole situation to him and asked him what had happened to him then. "I'd love to help you," William answered him with a sigh, "but I don't remember anything. Since I came to my senses on the street almost a year ago, that's how I've been living. All right, the town's homeless guys kept me warm. Otherwise, it would have been a real drag." Then Alex pulled a photograph and money out of his jacket pocket. She was pictured with her children. He had specifically asked her to take the picture so that he would have something to show William when he found him. Taking the picture, Alex's twin brother felt like he'd been electrocuted. Memories came back to him one by one, as if someone had unlocked his memory. Mother of God, the beggar could only squeeze out Marion. The man remembered everything. Large tears immediately rolled from his eyes. The feelings swept over him headlong. William was confused and lost in thought every time he tried to tell Alex about the last days of his former life. "I did work at that firm, after all, and we had an affair," William explained, "but I would never betray her." The beggar sighed heavily. "Marion and I genuinely loved each other. I wanted to propose to her. I'd even picked out a ring already. It was Deputy Director Peterson who forced me to make that unfortunate money transfer. If I'd known I was signing my love's death warrant with my own hands, I'd have torn him to shreds. But I didn't know anything. The deputy told me he had a lucrative contract with the foreigners. That's where the deal needs to be handled carefully, sort of like paying less tax. If that's true, why did you disappear? Why didn't you inquire about the fate of your fiancée?" Alex asked him. "Yes, because I didn't have time," William replied grimly. "I was coming home from work very late that day. The same Peterson asked me to stay late. Had to double-check some figures on the material purchase reports." The man rubbed his forehead slowly, as if recalling the events of that fateful evening. "Anyway, by the time I got outside, it was already very dark, you know. The last thing I remember is walking up to my driveway, and then darkness. I lost my memory almost completely. I couldn't even remember my name. I remember the U in my name," William shrugged. "Come to think of it, I turned out to have 3 kids before I was born. Thank you for taking care of my Marion. I swear I would never hurt her intentionally. It creeps me out when I think about the long 8 months she had to spend in that hell in the colony." Alex nodded. He realized that his brother had probably been attacked with the intent to kill him. This Peterson had apparently embezzled several million and then cleverly disposed of all the unwitting participants in the scam. Marion, as an accountant, was facing trial and jail time, and William was tried to be physically disposed of. Fortunately, they were unsuccessful. "What's this coming out of?" William suddenly asked him. "You're kind of like my twin brother. It can't be that we're that much alike." "I don't know how it happened myself," Alex replied thoughtfully, "but you and I will find out. In the meantime, I think we'd better go to the police and tell them everything. We've got to get this Peterson guy before he ruins someone else's life." William liked the idea, and they went to the nearest police station, where they told everything as it happened. The law enforcement officers, of course, were quite surprised by their story, but still detained the deputy to verify the information. Under pressure, Peterson quickly confessed and gave a confession, so he was soon to receive a fair trial and a big prison sentence. Meanwhile, Alex brought William to his parents' house, where he secretly showed him his father and mother. However, as soon as the homeless man took one look at these well-groomed, beautifully dressed elderly people, his face turned dead pale. "What is it?" Alex asked him worriedly. "It's like you've seen a ghost." "Not exactly, but almost," his brother answered him evasively. And then he turned to Alex, and he noticed the look of utter bewilderment on his face. "Alex, I know these people," he said. "What?" the businessman interjected in amazement. "I tell you exactly. They're my distant relatives, old-timers. They've looked after and supported me since I was a boy. That said, I've never been a guest of theirs." Alex felt his hands go cold with shock. This was something he certainly hadn't expected from his relatives. "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Alex clarified, "My last name is Smith, but I've never heard of you. To be honest, I didn't know I had such a grandnephew at all, and an exact replica." Alex grinned bitterly. He understood perfectly well now that his parents simply deceived him, lied straight to his face, not being ashamed of it. "I was always a distant relative to them." William sighed sadly. "But can it be that distant relatives like you and I are so much alike?" Alex looked angrily at his own father and mother. "Well, let's go up to them and ask them about it in person." William got a little worried as he watched Alex resolutely get out of the car and slam the driver's door behind him with force. But there was nothing to do. William got out of his padded seat as well. When his parents spotted Alex, they waved happily at him at first. Mrs. Vanessa was just tending the roses in their small garden at that moment. But when she saw William beside her son, the smile slowly disappeared from her face, giving way to confusion and fear. "Well, hello, Mum," Alex began coldly, approaching her. "Look who I met in town. A surprisingly similar person to me, isn't he?" "Son, wait, what's going on?" Mr. Carl hurried over to them. Seeing William, he gave an involuntary shudder. "Hello to you too, Dad," echoed the young businessman just as sternly. "Mom and I were just talking about how you forgot to tell me about our distant relative, William. And he, what a coincidence, resembles me like a twin, although you claimed I had no brothers, and certainly no twins. Meanwhile, you've been helping William all these years." The parents didn't know what to say to this to their son. Finally, as the awkward pause dragged on, Alex asked, "Aren't there too many lies in our family? Parents, let's go inside. It's time for you to tell William and me the whole truth." "Son," Mrs. Vanessa sobbed, "forgive us if you can. You were never meant to know about this." William, struck by the full poignancy of the situation, didn't know what to say, and was it even worth it? As they made their way inside the mansion and settled into the spacious living room, the first to begin the difficult story was the brother's father, Mr. Carl. "I don't even know where to begin, boys," he said slowly. "I guess with the fact that you're not our own sons." "How?" queried Alex dumbfoundedly. "Alas, but it's true," his father answered him. "This all happened a very long time ago. You weren't even a year old then. Mrs. Vanessa and I worked as ordinary merchandisers in the same shop in those days. There was no such thing as wealth. We could barely get by, and we were glad we did. It was very hard on us." "Alex," Mrs. Vanessa continued, "but we tried to be honest and decent people and never did anything illegal." Mr. Carl looked at his spouse strangely at these words, but said aloud, Anyway, when we saw that burning car on the road and you inside, Mrs. Vanessa and I had no time to think. We pulled you out of the fire a few moments before the car exploded. It was a terrible and unfortunate sight at the same time. We realized you were orphans, so we decided to take you in. Alex and William's father looked meaningfully at his wife. The latter, catching his gaze, only lowered her eyes. When we found out who your real parents were, we couldn't believe our luck at first. Terry and David turned out to be the real richest of the rich. Yes, they already had that furniture business, Dad confirmed. And if it hadn't been for us, it probably would have been taken away by racketeers, split up into pieces. End of business. The 90s are dashing times. Alex looked perplexed at his adoptive mother and father. So what's it come to? You took over our late parents' business. Do you realize that this is a crime, that you are criminals yourselves? Mr. Carl raised his hand warningly. Don't judge so unequivocally, Alex. Think about it yourself. If you had been found not by us, but by, say, child services, would you be who you are now? The man sighed heavily. Yes, we may have acted somewhere that wasn't entirely fair, but we truly adopted you, introduced ourselves as your birth parents' best friends. It didn't raise any questions at the time. The notary deeded all the property we had to us. This was where William couldn't take it anymore. But then why did you separate me and my brother? And why did you take the surname of our real mother and father? Mrs. Vanessa only shrugged her shoulders. It was easier that way. Besides, as it turned out later, your folks and I were remarkably similar in appearance. Not identical, of course, but the same type. So in order not to complicate the paperwork, we changed our modest surname Morris to the more sonorous Smith. People hardly noticed the difference. And we didn't bother to tell them who we really were. And so it was that, over time, we came to be seen as your real parents. It turned out to be very uncomfortable with William. It's true, Mr. Carl added. Being a toddler, he flatly refused to accept us. So eventually Mrs. Vanessa and I got tired of his tantrums, showed weakness and gave him to our friends. They had no children and they gladly agreed to take William. However, we tried always to keep him under control, to help him with advice, not to lose sight of him. But on the other hand, he didn't have to know he had a twin brother. Mrs. Vanessa finished for her husband. By the time things had settled down, society knew us as a one-child family. We needed to maintain that image, and we did our best to keep information about William's existence from leaking to the press. William shook his head reproachfully. What kind of people are you? He asked them. They told me they were always happy to help, but not to come to your house, or your important friends might think all sorts of things. You constantly emphasized my social status, saying that I was from a poor family, and that I had to study a lot to achieve everything in this life on my own. And I believed you. You inspired me all these years. And now it turns out that you've been pretending to be someone else all this time, playing your part in public and lying to Alex and I. William jumped to his feet. The young man was overwhelmed with anger. How could you? How could you do this to us? And more importantly, why? Mrs. Vanessa, who by now was sobbing profusely, clutched at her heart. Mum. Alex shrieked and instinctively rushed to the woman. Okay, William, calm down. Let's not make a drama here. Are you suggesting I calm down knowing these two are crooks? Wake up, Alex. They just stole our lives, you and me. But they weren't the ones who killed our biological parents. His brother sieged him sharply. If it wasn't for Mom and Dad, we might not even be alive anymore. Remember, the car could have exploded at any second. It's a miracle they were close to the crash site. But they became father and mother to you, William said grimly. Lived in luxury, of course, but you didn't need anything either. Didn't you have to economize on everything so that there would be food in the house tomorrow? Do you think we would have been better off in the orphanage? Alex asked calmly, carefully pouring his foster mother some water. Think about it. Both of us had families. Yes, even though not everything was perfect, but... Children, please stop fighting, Mrs. Vanessa asked them suddenly. Mr. Carl and I realize that we have caused you a lot of pain and hurt by our actions. I think it is time for us to make amends to you." Mr. Carl looked at William with genuine sympathy. "William, from now on you can be a full owner of the family business on an equal footing with Alex. We will sign all the documents. I don't want the people who have become the closest to me over the years to continue to suffer because of me." Alex's adoptive father tried to discreetly wipe away a tear, but he failed. The first tear was followed by a second. Mr. Carl wept silently, looking at his twin sons with love and regret. "Please forgive us," Mrs. Vanessa begged them. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Just so long as you call me Mum again, Alex. And you, William." Looking at the sincerity of these people, William still forgave them just as his brother had done. After all, Alex was right. They had saved them by pulling them out of the burning car, and that was the most important gift to the boys. Eventually, William got part of the firm rewritten to him, and he became involved in the family business with Alex. As it turned out, William had an amazing flair for profitable commercial prospects. Therefore, Alex thanked fate for the fact that he was able to meet his brother. That day, when the truth was revealed suddenly and unexpectedly, William could not stop thinking about one thing: how Marion and his children were. After a visit to Alex's parents, he asked his brother to take him to his beloved, and he promptly fulfilled his request. When William timidly entered the room, holding the door so that it would not creak, Marion, immersed in her troubles, did not immediately notice him. It was only when she turned round and saw her missing lover before her that the woman cried out loudly, "Oh my goodness, William, is it you I'm wondering about?" Marion slowly approached him and touched both hands to his face. "No, love. I'm not dreaming." Tears glistened in the other brother's eyes. "It's really me. Forgive me. I'm so sorry to you." William hugged the mother of his children tightly and began to shower her face and hands with kisses. Marion was embarrassed. She realized in front of her stood her true lover and the closest person in the world. A little later, when William told her his story and explained why he had failed to protect her from Peterson, Marion nodded understandingly and said, "Now I see that you and your brother are completely different people. God, I'm so ashamed. I must have hurt him so much. I said so many nasty things to him when I came here. I can't believe he let me stay here after all that. I mean, he took my word for it and went looking for you. Absolutely amazing man, this Alex." "Yeah, my brother turned out to be a good guy," William confirmed with a smile. "He even helped me forgive our adoptees. Or rather, that's what they are to him. But to me, they've always been distant relatives." Not wanting to remember the bad things, William shook his head, as if to chase the heavy thoughts away. The most important thing for him now was to stay close to his beloved and his children, and do his best to get back on his feet. He understood that he could not live under the same roof with his brother forever. But now he had a chance to realize himself in the family business, and it was a chance he wouldn't miss. "That's your tramp brother and his wife. Are they going to live with us like that now?" inquired Trinity in a disgruntled tone the day after she and William returned home. "Well, how can you say that?" Alex became indignant. "William and Marion will be here for exactly as long as it takes. They are my family. Don't forget that, please, and show them at least a modicum of respect." "And I'm not family?" The bride frowned. "We have a wedding coming up, and it's like you don't notice anything now. No interest, only relatives on your mind." The young businessman quickly realized that Trinity was deliberately provoking him into a scandal. It was easy to imagine how she felt now that she wasn't the only one on Alex's mind. His fiancée, as it turned out, was very jealous, and that was something the younger Smith wasn't going to tolerate. "Trinity, honey," he began, "maybe we should cancel this wedding." "What?" She couldn't believe her ears. "But why?" "Because of your crazy in-laws. So tell me that this William has told you a bunch of nasty things about me. I'm sure you would never have thought of such a thing yourself." Alex only smiled politely. "It's not about my brother, and it's certainly not about me. It's about you, sweetheart. Look at you, you just can't live in peace. I really tried to live up to your high standards. But I guess it's time to face the truth. We're not right for each other." "No," Trinity shrieked angrily, "I'm not letting you go. I always get what I want, and I want to marry you." At that moment, the bride reminded him of a capricious child. "And I don't want to marry you," he answered her simply. "If we are so scandalized now, what will happen next? Haven't you thought of that? And then, I'm not a thing for you to possess. I hope in time you'll realize that this decision was the right one. Trinity wasn't prepared to put up with that attitude. Her pride made her quickly pack her suitcase and leave Alex's house for good that same day. The businessman's parents were upset at first that the wedding was disrupted, but eventually accepted their son's choice. The most surprising thing was that as soon as Trinity left, Alex's soul immediately became lighter. From now on, he decided to live a normal life, where no one would tell him what to do and how to do it, and where every decision would depend solely on himself. Sometime later, he met Cassandra. She was a nice, pretty girl of about 25. They had met by chance. Cassandra had twisted her leg trying to run across the road at a green light. When she was in the middle of it, the heel of her shoe broke, and she almost fell on the carriageway. Good thing Alex was nearby. He was the one who helped the stranger. "Let me give you a lift home," he offered. "I'm afraid with your bad leg, it's better not to walk on the tarmac here. It's time to complain to the road builders." Cassandra only laughed lightly in response and agreed to accept Alex's help. He didn't really know what it was about her that caught his eye, but there was something subtly familiar about her face. Cassandra reminded Alex of someone, but the young businessman couldn't understand who. From that moment on, he and Cassandra had a tender and kind relationship. At first, it was more like friendship, but soon the young people realized that they were perfect for each other, and sometimes they could read the thoughts of their beloved. Cassandra had a young son from a previous relationship, Kevin, who suffered from a heart defect. And Cassandra was ready to work as a nurse in 3 shifts, just to raise money for the operation. Upon learning of this, Alex promised that he would definitely help the boy. "But don't worry, I will be able to get Kevin's surgery out of turn," the businessman assured the young mum. Cassandra only cried gratefully and kissed her lover. A couple of weeks later, Alex invited her to family dinner. He really wanted to introduce Cassandra to his parents, and she was not against it. However, when everyone was already gathered around the table, Mrs. Vanessa apparently accidentally dropped some of the cutlery. Cassandra bent down to help her pick up the spoons and forks. And at that moment, a small heart-shaped gold pendant fell out from behind the collar of her dress. "Oh my God!" Alex's mother exclaimed and involuntarily sat down on the edge of her chair, clasping her hands over her mouth. "No, it can't be. Not this. Not this. What happened?" "Alex didn't understand a thing, Mum. Don't scare me." Mrs. Vanessa looked horrified, first at her future daughter-in-law and then at her husband. Mr. Carl, noticing the pendant, immediately turned pale. The parents revealed to their son another terrible secret. It turns out that his fiancée was their own daughter. "We needed the money then very much. The mother confessed everything, so we gave our baby girl to an orphanage so she would never know who she was." Here Mrs. Vanessa burst into loud tears. "How could I, God, how could I? But Alex, I had no idea how I could explain the addition of a daughter to our family, and a daughter of your and William's age. I decided I would go all the way and live up to the image I'd created earlier with your dad. I don't think I regretted it very much later, but I couldn't change anything. This is the pendant we gave Cassandra at birth," Alex's father added. "It's the only one like it. I had it specially ordered from a jewelry shop. Cassandra, daughter, don't hold a grudge. We've made so many mistakes in life. I'm afraid we won't be able to undo them until the end." Cassandra only gently stroked her fiancé's parents' shoulders. "Let us not suffer for what we can no longer change. Especially since I had the most wonderful adoptive parents in the world. I always knew I wasn't related to them, but that didn't stop me from loving them and them from loving me. So my childhood was completely cloudless." Alex's parents gave their biological daughter a friendly hug. Alex, on the other hand, was so shocked by what he had learnt that he couldn't immediately find the right words. So that's what had caught his eye about his fiancée. That's who she reminded him of, his own mother. Still, he managed to find the strength to forgive his parents. After all, he was once again convinced that he had the most wonderful bride in the world. A few months later, Alex and Cassandra had a beautiful wedding in nature. Since they were not blood relatives, they could marry without any problems. It was the happiest day for both of them. The guests, including Brother William with his wife and children, considered the celebration to be the best they had ever been to. Cassandra's young son had undergone heart surgery and was now in perfect health. When he got older, he enjoyed playing with William's sons, as he was a frequent guest at Alex and Cassandra's house. The brothers still run a common business, and now their whole huge family is absolutely happy. Cassandra in the near future plans to open a small medical center to help women who have problems with the reproductive system. Now, having come out of maternity leave, she is actively improving her professional qualifications, hoping to help everyone who wants to have children. Why maternity leave? Yes, because recently she gave her beloved a daughter, whom the couple named Jenny. The girl is perfectly healthy and pleases her parents every day. The bell rang at the most businesslike time, 10 a.m. At this hour, she still liked the movie Arrhythmia, the one about the emergency room doctor. But before that, she couldn't understand the main character's girlfriend. The girl returns when the house is buzzing with drunken company. She is invited to join them. She deflects with words say, "Not now, guys, I'm tired." She goes into the next room, closes the door behind her, turns on the music and falls asleep. How can she fall asleep in such a mess, and to a song? When Miranda became an EMT, she understood. Now she could pass out on the bus, or in a concert hall, or at home, even if the ceiling above her was on fire, especially after a night like tonight. Of course, it's not an ambulance, but it's not much easier. There are times when the duty is more or less calm, but now the labor was a mess. In addition, the older one, with twins, also decided to give birth now. 2 weeks ahead of schedule, by the way. It's a good thing everything went without complications. We didn't have to call for help from surgery. But Miranda went home, as they say, down the wall. When she returned, her husband had already gone to work, leaving behind unwashed dishes and a hungry cat. Miranda caught herself using medical terms in her normal life, too. The gray puddle's pitiful and demanding cries had been controlled with the help of a couple of Purina packets. Then Miranda sat on the stool, unable to decide whether she wanted to eat or sleep. The last thing she wanted to do was move and get up. Finally, she cut off a thicker piece of sausage, drank the sandwich with milk straight from the bottle, and wandered to the bedroom, taking off her clothes as she went. What indescribable bliss it was to collapse into a clean, soft bed, to burrow into the pillows. Sometimes it seemed to Miranda that somewhere down there, deep down, if you climbed into it, there was a childhood left. You could dive into your own bed and come out in one where you were 10 years old and had so much strength that you could fly. But she wasn't flying now. The crow horse kicked her in the stomach with its hoof, but it didn't hurt, only frightened her. Probably if she had been dreaming a good and peaceful dream, the phone call would not have woken her up. But the black horse, multiplied by the mechanical trills coming from the corridor. 100 times Miranda wanted to give up the landline. She wished she and William only had cell phones that could be set to do not disturb. But the apartment belonged to her mother-in-law, and Peggy Urton's principle of life was let it be this applied to everything, from old buttons, which her mother-in-law carefully kept in a wooden box, and to the non-working television set, which had been moved to the pantry. What if it was still useful? The phone went silent, then rang again. Miranda got up as slowly as if she hadn't woken up on the move, but had been revived and was still part zombie. In the hallway, she leaned against a coat rack. Candy Adamson? A voice asked, sounding like it belonged to a very young girl. If the girl pretended to be a special investigator, she could hang up right away. But no, Miranda felt a vengeful feeling. She even wanted the girl to say, "Scammers are trying to make a loan in your name, and you have to help us." Then you can remember the turbulent years of youth, and tax the wench not even 7 stories, but that the size of a skyscraper. The resentment at fate for waking her up was so great that Miranda longed to let the wench's ear melt from her profanity. "It's the assistant notary," the girl said. "You need to come to our place on the Embarcadero to read the will. You have an inheritance. Will you accept it or refuse it? Can you come today? We're open till 6. No, Miranda didn't know why she'd said that. Let's do it tomorrow. Later, she couldn't explain to herself why she had decided to take this pause. And who? "Who left me an inheritance?" she asked. "Can you tell me the name? And what inheritance are we talking about?" "It's a house. You've been bequeathed a house. Come and have it explained to you." Then the girl got distracted. Someone started to question her. She started to answer the person she was talking to, and a couple of moments later she hung up. Miranda was left at a complete loss. She went back to the bedroom and climbed into bed again. But sleep didn't come to her now. A house. She would have been surprised if someone had left her even a small amount of money. There was no such person. And suddenly a whole house. It would be possible if she had been a social worker, taking care of some lonely old woman. But who gives such gifts to midwives? Miranda tried to think, but something like a premonition stopped her. "Don't, it was an inner voice, otherwise you might remember something very, very unpleasant." It was too late. Miranda put her palm to her mouth. She saw that face right in front of her again, those eyes, a rich emerald color like no living person's ever had. Not unless contact lenses. Again that caressing, ingratiating voice whispered, "And I'll make you a present. You'll get it when the time comes. Then you won't turn away, you won't go away." Has the hour come? Perhaps her family was once an ordinary young family with a husband and wife who love each other and their little daughter. They are almost children themselves, and they sincerely consider her to be the eighth wonder of the world. Only Miranda didn't remember those wonderful times, even if she was dipping her memory deep, deep into the place where all outlines are blurred and reality is so easy and simple to coexist with a fairy tale. For example, she once caught a star. The 5-beam neon blue star was lying in the palm of her hand and glowing. "It's bad for star on Earth," said Mom. "Let's let her go to the sky." And as soon as Miranda unclenched her fingers, the star, easily like an air bubble or a balloon, began to rise. Miranda still believed it had really happened. Her mother only laughed when she mentioned it. Another time Miranda was flying. She and Daddy were walking through town. There was a blizzard, very strong winds, and real snow swirls. And she was about 3 years old. Daddy held her hand, but the wind picked her up and carried her. It was a tiny distance, just 2 or 3 steps, but a real flight. These are the only 2 memories of a happy family. But it's so easy to say, even to yourself, if you're sober nonsense, it never happened, it couldn't have happened. And what was real, on the one hand, my father somewhere far away in a distant northern city. On the other, Mom and stepdad. My father never came, only called 3 or 4 times a year. And he sent gifts. A reindeer hat, pine nuts for Miranda, and money for what her daughter needed by postal order in her mother's name. And Mom and stepdad had careers. Later, when Miranda watched Western movies with an adult eye, she thought they would fit in perfectly in this life where careers ruled the roost. No, stepfather never hurt his stepdaughter, and Mom was quite attentive whether she needed to take Miranda to the children's clinic or celebrate her birthday. Mom never forgot not only the important, but even the little things, and did everything flawlessly. My mom worked as a lawyer, and her memory was phenomenal. She memorized all her clients, even their phone numbers by heart, and if you woke her up at night, she could recite the pages of a case like poetry. If she undertook to defend someone, almost with 100% probability this person could celebrate victory in advance. The stepfather was in the construction business. Miranda took it literally. Her stepfather was tied up in the construction business, but he was in love with his bonds, business trips, clients, new projects. He could only talk about these things at home. And my mother about court hearings, about the defense arguments, about sarcastic prosecutors and their triumphs, more like a victory in a fight. And so often one would say to the other stepmother's stepfather, or vice versa, "I'm proud of you." This pride was evident. During the time my mother lived in her second marriage, they changed several apartments, each time moving to a more spacious one and closer to the historical center. The brands of cars changed. The resorts to which my mother and stepfather went on vacation became more and more prestigious and expensive. And on the other side was Miranda and her life. For a while, a long time ago, Mom had wanted them to be friends. And then it just sort of went straight to another dimension. It's good that you're growing up on your own. Soon you'll be living on your own, and then. Miranda used to go camping. She was 12 years old when she joined the Young Hikers Club. The leader of the hikers was the same, the restless Margot, with a stick up her ass, as her stepfather used to say. And so it began. Every weekend, a hike in the surrounding mountains, even in winter. They returned in the early twilight, drunk with frost, hungry, because there was never enough tea in the thermos and pies, and did not hurry to scatter home, but sat in the club exchanging impressions, telling stories, making plans. And Miranda came home the way her stepfather probably came home to the hotel on business trips just to spend the night. And during the vacations. Then we'd take a train to some glorious city, and Margot would swear because the guys would play The City Goes to Sleep and the mob wakes up all night long, and the girls would lock themselves in the bathroom and spend half an hour there to put on makeup with sense, with purpose, with care, and really you can't walk around San Francisco without makeup. It's like going barefoot in the street. Or we rafted down the river in kayaks, went on the Zhigulevskaya around the world trip or on a horseback ride. If Miranda had been asked about her plans in those years, she would have said she would never settle down, never put down roots somewhere in one place like those closest to her did. She wants a house on the water, some sort of very simple yacht. And after the small journeys, the big journeys are sure to follow. When now you can go to Ireland, to the Emerald Isle. You can live in a haunted castle, dance in the street on St. Patrick's Day, and then pull up the anchors and sail to the opposite end of the earth somewhere in New Zealand, to another Emerald Island, so that the whole world can be hugged like that pillow before going to sleep, and enjoy its beauty when reality is more beautiful than any dream. Soon, very soon, she will be on her own feet, and then goodbye to the cold house and the ambitious dreams of its inhabitants. She has enough of herself and a backpack on her back. Her family are sober people and know that their desires have limits. And what Miranda wanted was always over the top. And she did not try to seize what she admired, to appropriate it for herself. It was enough for her that she saw it, that it existed under the sun. All these amazing cities, castles, waterfalls, depths. And then everything changed and ended. In one day, or rather one evening. The very night the circus came to town. No, she wasn't going to go to the show. Miranda avoided taking money from her mother unless she could do without it. When she started earning her own money, that would be different. It was just a spring evening on her way back from the club. She was on her way through the park, and there was a colorful tent, and the wagons were close together, one to another. Everyone around was enjoying the warmth, almost the first of the year. Already they wanted to throw off their coats and jackets. Already they could see the coming summer ahead. There was a queue at the iron fence at the entrance, where they were checking tickets. Miranda had never seen so many children all winter, both very young, in strollers and a little older, and almost all of them were holding white and cotton candy clouds. Miranda was drawn to the carriages. They were so different in this celebration of life, tired, with peeling paint, with wheels that had measured thousands of kilometers. They smelled of sweat, old age, and cheap powder. Miranda stroked one of them with the palm of her hand, a motion of compassion. "Come here," she suddenly heard a voice say. It wasn't someone real calling out to her, a voice sounded in her head. Please, it didn't say, but Miranda realized that this someone was asking for her. She almost whispered back, but how, and immediately realized what she had to do. Just get on all fours, or even crawl, and crawl into that circle. But in the carriages, live circus performers and their animals. And of course she'd be chased out of here right away. At best they'll call her a fool, because there are predators here. At worst, they'll think she was trying to steal something. But she couldn't refuse the voice. And so, moving like a caterpillar, pushing with her legs and knees, she crawled the few meters. Now the voice sounded as if the unknown man were speaking directly into her ear. "Let me out." She jerked, tried to look around, and immediately banged her head painfully against the metal bottom of the wagon. No one was near her, but someone was calling out to her. At the same time, Miranda saw that there was no one on the small platform that the cars surrounded on all sides. Then she decided to climb out. That cage was right above her. Above where she had just crawled. There was no other way to call it a cage because it was a frequent grating, and inside it sat a man. A boy about the same age as her. He was looking at her, but his lips did not move, and she heard it clearly again. "Let me out. Open the latch. No one should be in a cage, no living thing. My mother told me that once, when Miranda was a little girl and they took her to the sea. Every time she passed a fisherman, she tried to save a single fish. Stealthily snatch it from the bucket and release it into the sea. But now she wasn't at all sure she could handle the lock. Just pull the latch to the side. It sticks sometimes. Pull it hard, one pull. That impatient voice ... Did it actually sound, or did she hear it in her head? Miranda pulled the latch with both hands, writhing with effort. Then she stood on her tiptoes and pushed against it with her skinny body. And that's when the latch finally slid sideways, smooth as butter. The boy was already standing near the door, and when he heard the click, he opened it with lightning speed. And faster than Miranda realized what was happening, he slid under the wagon and was gone. "Who are you? What's your name?" "I'll find you, Miranda," she said. And before she could answer, the last words came out. She needed to get out of here as fast as the former prisoner had disappeared. But at the same moment, she saw an older man. More like an old man, a tall, thin man in a blue shirt and jeans. He was carrying 2 buckets, probably on his way to feed the animals. When he saw the open cage, he did not set it down, but dropped his burden and raised his palms. "I only got here now ... I'm late ... Didn't manage to stop you ... Girl. What did you do? What's that boy in there for?" "He's being punished, isn't he?" Miranda asked, trying to establish some kind of rapport with the old man. But the man only shook his head. "Maybe it's a good thing you did it, but what happens now? Get out of here if you can." Miranda didn't have time to take his advice. A woman entered the small area, surrounded by carriages and hidden from view. She was about 35 years old, and there was so much inner strength in her that even her step was dancing. Her dark hair hung to her shoulders, and she was very pretty, but that wasn't what impressed Miranda. The woman was eating a rose. Yes, she was holding a red rose on a long stem and devouring it voluptuously like ice cream. The old man seemed to hold his breath the moment the woman saw the open door and the empty cage. She raised her thin eyebrows in surprise and turned around to the old man. It said without words that she was waiting for an explanation. The old man waved his hands. "I only came now. I saw for myself what you saw. It was too late to run." And Miranda braced herself for the reprimand she was about to receive. The boy probably deserved a severe punishment, and she'd set him free. The woman handed the old man the tattered flower and walked toward Miranda. The closer she came, the more uncomfortable she felt. When the stranger leaned over her so that Miranda could feel her breath on her, she was seized with an irrational terror. The woman held her by the shoulder, and her fingers were strong, as if made of metal. "You stole from us, sweetheart." It took Miranda gathering all her courage to answer. "But if that boy lives with you, he'll come back. He'll go for a walk and then he'll come back." "He's not coming back." A smile appeared on the woman's lips, and Miranda felt as if she were about to share the rose's fate. The stranger bent down, and there's no way out. Bright green eyes, that glowing hue that no living person could ever have, stared straight at her. "For what you have done, you will get a present." The woman's voice became ingratiating, cooing, like a predator enjoying her prey. "Oh, not now. But the hour will come, and you will surely get it. You won't be able to refuse my gift, and then nothing will save you. Get out." Her fingers loosened on Miranda's shoulder, but the pain remained. The girl felt that her right arm was barely obeying her, just a whip. The old man hurriedly, nudging her in the back, led her out of the courtyard and onto the wicket, behind which the people with tickets were crowding. Stepping back a few steps, Miranda turned around. The old man was still looking at her, shaking his head. The expression on his face was as if he were saying goodbye to someone who was hopelessly ill. "Maybe I shouldn't go." Miranda asked her husband for the umpteenth time. "It's probably a divorce ... who would bequeath the house to me. Neither my dad nor my mom would do that. And besides, we're talking about a will, and they're still alive. Thank God ... She hoped William would listen to her. He liked to amuse himself by talking to crooks. When he received another warning that someone had gained access to his bank deposit, he would make himself comfortable on the sofa and say, feigning alarm, that he had millions in his account, and of course he was very worried about them. Therefore, of course, he was ready to fulfill all the orders of the investigator. Then followed a half-hour conversation, during which William pretended to be an idiot who had to explain everything 20 times. And only when he had driven the crooks to a frenzy did he laugh obscenely loud, send them to the mother lode, and call it a day. But now her husband was unaccustomedly serious. "Let's go there and find out," he suggested. "There really is a notary at that address, and has been for years," he said. "If it's a stupid joke, they'll explain it to us." We're not risking anything. What if? Well, what the hell? I had to agree to it heartily. And it was so fortunate that on the day Miranda had bargained for, they were both free. The young woman had even mapped out an escape route for herself. If the inheritance turns out to be a hoax, they will go to a small bistro nearby as a sign of moral compensation. The ice cream cocktails there were very good. And it's been so long since they've been out together with William. In fact, Miranda was prepared to have the notary's office point them out the door as soon as she said her last name. That's the first we've heard. There's no inheritance for you. And no one called you. But they were politely invited to wait in the reception area. They had to wait in line for an hour. Miranda was getting more and more nervous, occasionally taking her husband's hand and squeezing it tightly. Then she let go and looked at William with a guilty smile. He nodded reassuringly, saying, "Wait, it'll all work out." Finally, their turn came, and now the notary, a blooming woman in her 50s, pulls out papers from a file and reads out in her usual rapid-fire voice that the will makes Candy Adamson the owner of the house located at. William's face reflected complete amazement. It was a dream to live in a place like this. An ancient boulevard that stretched through the center of the city and ended at the foot of the mountains. They had never hoped to live in one of these mansions. It was simply impossible. Probably we're talking about some backwoods chicken shed after all. Miranda, on the other hand, had other things to worry about. How she interjected, "Could you please tell me the name of the woman who left me all this?" Tiffany Gilbert, the notary read in syllables. "I knew her. She came to me many times. Her grandson was a troublemaker, a drunk. But the grandmother herself was wonderful. Almost to the last day she was running around the stores by herself, with those Nordic poles. She survived the blockade, by the way." Things got very confusing. To the notary, too. The woman pushed her glasses up on her nose and shifted her eyes from Miranda to William and back again. "So you're saying you didn't know her at all?" "What about that son of hers?" William asked. "In order to change the conversation, he won't sue us? After all, he probably hoped to inherit from his mother." "The son, as far as I know, died before she did. It's not uncommon for alcoholics to have parents who get over them. Maybe that's what got Tiffany Gilbert down. And how did the grandmother blockade survivor get such a house? As far as I know, such old ladies have time to save up for their funerals and only." Her husband was a famous man. The notary's voice became drier, as if William's over-suspiciousness was unpleasant to her. "So ... sign here ... now here." It didn't seem to occur to the notary that such an inheritance could be refused. William, too, waited impatiently for Miranda to sign here, and wherever there was a check mark. So the young woman went outside as a homeowner. Miranda and William looked at each other. They both had the same thought to go to see. "Hold on, I'll call my mom," William said, and pulled out his phone. Miranda didn't want to see Peggy Urton again, but she understood her husband. Mom had been with him all her life, and Miranda had only been with him for 3 years. So he wanted to share his joy with someone he'd become diffusely attached to. Miranda mentally groaned her scientific terms again. She couldn't think or speak otherwise. Peggy Urton was apparently so shocked that she took the unprecedented step of calling a cab. Normally she would have considered this a hobby, and calculated how much of her pension would be eaten up by such a millionaire's game. But when they reached the house, Peggy Urton was already there. They recognized the mansion from a distance because a familiar figure was walking along the sidewalk and wringing her hands in delight. She believed in this miracle that had fallen on their heads. Maybe because she'd been waiting for miracles all her life, dreamed of winning the lottery or find the treasure, waiting for God to say to her, as in the commercials, "You deserve it." "Did you bring the key?" was the first thing Peggy Urton asked, forgetting to say hello. William spread his hands. "We just wanted to see." It was a house of old brick, of some dull purple color. It had arched windows, a mezzanine, a balcony with a wrought iron lattice, and a front lawn, like the neighboring mansions. "How could you not even know about the key?" Peggy Urton reprimanded. "We have to figure out the scope of work." Miranda looked at her in bewilderment and noted that it was probably the first time her mother-in-law had ever treated her as an equal. Miranda had been in disgrace before, and often when they met, her mother-in-law spoke only to her son, and it was as if her daughter-in-law were not even there. There was an official reason, of course. She takes other people's children, but she can't have her own, her mother-in-law had once said, and Miranda had heard it. But in her heart, Miranda thought she just didn't like her mother-in-law. There are times when a person arouses antipathy, and no matter how much you smash him to pieces. Now Peggy Urton was excitedly explaining to her specifically, "I can already see that the windows here need to be changed. We can measure them today and order plastic ones. I know a company that gives senior citizens a discount." How can you ruin such an antique? Miranda wondered. Then a neighbor called out to them. Peggy Urton hurried to her, asking for the key, and it turned out that there was a key, and the neighbor was about to bring it out. Miranda hesitated, delaying until the last minute, the moment when there would be no way out and she would have to enter the house. On the other side, an elderly neighbor was mowing his lawn and occasionally glanced curiously at the new tenants. Miranda took a few steps in his direction. "Did you buy a house or something?" the neighbor asked. It was an inheritance, Miranda said, her tone apologetic to Miranda's surprise. Not only did the old man not congratulate her, he did not say anything friendly, as one might expect. On the contrary, he nodded his head as if in sympathy. "Are you going to turn it in?" he asked, as if still hoping for something. No, Miranda glanced around. The door was open, so her husband and mother-in-law were already checking out the new property. "I guess we'll be moving here ourselves." The old man lost interest in her and went back to his lawnmower. "Why did you ask?" Miranda asked before she left. He shrugged. "Because it's not going to end well. Nobody lives here for long." "You don't like it?" Miranda asked cautiously. The old man shrugged. "Sorry, I didn't get a chance to ask. Today the tenants are still here, and they don't seem to be going anywhere, and tomorrow they're gone. No one's been here more than a year." "Excuse me, but the landlady?" Miranda suddenly remembered she's owned this house for years. So she didn't live here. She was a renter. I only ever saw her when she came to meet the new tenants and show them around. What would scare them away? It didn't sound like a direct question, but like Miranda was thinking out loud. The old man was silent for a moment, then pointed a bony finger toward the house. "I've been living here myself for 50 years, so I can't say that others don't like it. But I've worked it out. If the shutter's close, you're waiting for new tenants." "What do you mean?" Miranda asked in confusion. The landlady would come, close the shutters, and then bring the people who wanted to rent the house. Nope. The old tenants were still here. You know, people aren't used to shutters. It doesn't even occur to them to close them at night. Why is it that one evening the shutters are suddenly closed? And nobody opens them in the morning? A day or two goes by and the landlady brings someone new. She unlocks the windows and doors and shows the house in all its glory. "If you're going to live here, you might be able to clear up this mystery." Miranda saw her husband walking toward her from the house, and that he was happy as can be, smiling ear to ear. "Don't you want to look at it?" he asked before he could approach. "Go take a look. You'll like it." "I doubt it," Miranda muttered quietly. The men shook hands, and William spoke again. Miranda realized at once that he was stinking with joy. She called it verbal incontinence. His husband talked about everything at once, straying from topic to topic. He asked if the rent was high and what was the land tax. He always mentioned that he was glad to meet the neighbors, and of course shared his plans for what he wanted to build here. A garage and a bathhouse first and foremost. The old man listened aloofly, and eventually the animation in William's voice began to fade. "Come on," her husband took Miranda's hand. "You'll see how nice it is inside. You'll like it." She really liked it. The corridor is very wide and bright, and the windows look out onto the garden. And in winter you can put plants in tubs and look at the greenery all year round. Big rooms. And where there was a hall, as they call the most spacious room, would fit their entire current apartment. Peggy Urton's eyes lit up, and she talked so enthusiastically about the renovations as if the house belonged to her, as if Miranda was nobody. The young woman only noted this, but took no offense. She waited politely for her mother-in-law to shut up and felt sorry for the way things had turned out. William sensed something. "Do you agree with everything Mom suggests?" he asked. "Is there anything you'd like to change?" Peggy Urton stopped precisely at a run-up. She looked at Miranda, as if she were looking at an unfortunate obstacle that might interfere with her plans. But the young woman only shook her head. I don't really care. Do as you see fit. Vitya, when we take Mom, let's stop at a cafe and order a large cocktail. William liked to remember how they met. He thought it was very beautiful and romantic. Miranda had gone on vacation with her mother and stepfather. Not because she had succumbed to her mother's entreaties. It was just that the camping trip Margot had planned had fallen through. The head of the hiking club ended up in the hospital. She had to have her gallbladder removed as a matter of urgency. I've been going somewhere all my life, eating what's cooked in a cauldron, some porridge with stew. How can I be healthy? Miranda was very upset then. All winter long, she had dreamed of these 2 weeks on horseback and in her native mountains. The starry sky at night, the legends Margot was good at telling, the honeyed smell of flowers, the tea that smelled of smoke, and the camaraderie that was the strongest in the world. Her mother noticed Miranda walking around upset, her eyes wet, found out what was wrong, and solved the problem in one fell swoop. "You're coming to Egypt with us," she said, "and don't be naughty, please. It's a great hotel, and you'll find something to do without us if you're bored." The stepfather expressed neither joy nor displeasure, and the matter of the trip was settled. Miranda was going into her senior year of high school that summer. She hadn't vacationed with her mother in a long time, and now that she was looking at her with adult eyes, she wondered if her mother was partying her ass off. Usually reserved, energetic, decisive, a real businesswoman, now she behaved like a child, ready to agree to any adventure. "Jump into the water from the rocks, please. A party on a yacht in the open sea, she is the first. To try some new exotic dish, give only a fork." And even at the disco, her mother danced as if she were 20 years younger than she really was. If that's what she considers real life, if that's what she is, how can she suppress it for a whole year? Miranda thought, so it's back home, Mom's not real, keeping herself in line. How hard that must be. She herself remained as she had always been. She couldn't stand the heat very well, and it was hard to tempt her to go sightseeing or stroll the local streets. But the hotel was nice, and Miranda spent most of her time in its coolness. But she liked the sea very much. Miranda was not a good swimmer, and her greatest pleasure was just sitting in the water, wearing a mask, and looking at everything around her, at the magnificent underwater world. Mom noticed this and organized a scuba diving trip. With an instructor, of course, but the swarthy guy, who swam like a fish, paid more attention to his mother and stepfather than to Miranda. He decided to show them some underwater caves. The girl, however, found herself in the depths, at some point panicked, and she immediately became short of breath. Perhaps the worst thing is to panic. In the blue haze surrounding you from all sides, you can no longer understand where the top is, where the bottom is. You try to surface, you get desperate, because the surface is not approaching. Your movements become cramped, your throat spasms. It was good that William had been there at that moment and had picked up Miranda, who was hysterical, and surfaced with her. He had said many times afterward that he didn't know what would have happened without him. And Miranda could sense that he was proud of himself. Then they did not part for the rest of the vacation. Miranda's mother, who had not even noticed the incident, was pleased that her daughter had found herself a good boy. William introduced Miranda to his parents, but the girl immediately felt that Peggy Urton did not like her. Probably the latter thought that Miranda was too simple for her son. William was a tall, handsome boy, and here she was a tanned, ponytailed brat. But the young people spent almost all their time together, and no one could prevent them. And the memory of the underwater adventure, of saving the girl, remained the most vivid and dear for William. Now Miranda had the feeling that her husband was drowning, and now it was her turn to save the day. Jeremy had been told from childhood that he was a special child, but he hadn't noticed it for a long time. Reading other people's thoughts was as easy for him as noticing that it was raining or sunny outside. He answered questions before his parents had time to ask them, and it was useless to secretly think up a birthday present for him. And when he was a baby, he often embarrassed his mother on walks by telling her in his sonorous baby voice what people were thinking as they walked toward him. ... But he didn't want anything that time. Honestly, he was old enough, 10 years old, to control himself perfectly well. And by the way, he'd never really liked the circus. His classmates had dragged him to see the show. And he could have gotten away with it. He would have left the circus with the rest of them, if he hadn't been so stupidly caught in the act. When the magician, who looked very tired and not at all fun at heart, asked someone from the audience to help him, Jeremy, to his misfortune, volunteered. He was blindfolded, forced to turn his back, and the magician went into the auditorium to hide a crystal egg from someone in the audience. Then the magician removed a thick black blindfold from Jeremy's eyes and waved his hand in the direction of the gathered people. They said, "Choose who has it." It was supposed to start a game of cold and hot, but Jeremy did not think for a minute. He said, pointing with his chin at a heavy-set man, and he advised, "You'd better switch at once. He will give you the egg, and you will give him the live rooster. After all, you still wanted to get it and say that the uncle had hatched it out of the egg, like a hen." The audience laughed, and the magician laughed. After the show, the circus performers, though whether they were circus performers, vampires, or evil sorcerers, was more like them, asked Jeremy how he'd done it and what else he could do. He spoke honestly about his abilities, adding that he gets along well with them in ordinary life, and he is not going to perform in the circus. The most beautiful of the women ruffled his hair. "Think about it. If you ride with us, you'll be rich and famous. We can ask your parents to let you go." Jeremy even laughed, imagining how his dad and mom would react to such a suggestion. They'd worry if he was half an hour late at school or at a friend's birthday party. They'd let him go to who knows where, with who knows who. I don't know. Finally, Jeremy was released, and he ran out into the park, drenched in the last rays of the sun, which was about to disappear over the horizon. His friends were waiting for him, and everything seemed to be the same as usual, running home with the boys. A delicious dinner prepared by his mother's stew with potatoes and cakes for tea. But it was as if someone had put an ice flake down his neck, and it wouldn't melt. And the next morning, hurrying to school, he saw the very beauty from the circus. She stood slender, flexible, in black leather pants, standing near the corner of the house, and to all appearances, waiting for him. "Come here a minute," he heard him say. Only then, much later, did he realize that the woman had not uttered a word aloud. Had there been a witness to the scene, he would have said that the stranger had been silent. But her thoughts were so clear and strong that he went to them as to a call. Then he saw a van around the corner, and a moment later a black handkerchief fell across his face. ... Over the years, they've used different ways to keep him. They tied him by a rope, chained him, kept him in a cage. His attempts to escape were especially desperate and hopeless at first, when he knew his parents were searching for him and going mad with anxiety. From here, from afar, he couldn't read their thoughts, but he could feel how they felt, and it brought him to tears, to the point of wanting, like an animal caught in a trap, to chew off a limb and escape. But he did not compete with ordinary people. He realized that at once. His attempts were anticipated with a smile and thwarted. He was punished, but not cruelly. They could have done anything to him, for he was at their mercy. But they never hit him, never physically hurt him. More often than not, they just left him hungry, sometimes for days at a time. The traveling circus continued to travel the world, and it seemed to Jeremy that he was trapped in some ruthless mechanism, and it was impossible to get out of it, only to obey. Sometimes, very rarely, he was forced to take part in the performances, and he invariably surprised the audience to the point of exclaiming, "It can't be. It's a hell of a thing." But the main thing that was expected of him was to find others like himself. Those who could understand him when not a single word was spoken aloud, when only a mental conversation was going on. There were such people, even if only occasionally. Of course, none of them had a gift equal to the one Jeremy had. All of them turned out to be weaker than him. There were those who could see the future, but Jeremy had never met a strong clairvoyant. The people he'd pointed out had been introduced to the circus people, talked to them. And Jeremy subconsciously expected that sooner or later one of them would end up next to him in the cage. But it didn't happen. When he asked Ada, the very beauty who was in charge of them all, she only smiled. "You're the best. You're all we need. Even I can't stand to be around you." "Why do you need all these people?" he wondered. And then she spoke the very words he thought. "It's a fairy tale. It can't be real. Because of these people, we are practically immortal. Our lives don't end." And that girl who helped Jeremy eventually escape, they must have seen her as a tidbit too. Peggy Urton was learning the finer points of repair. God knows where she got her information. If she'd ever cared about the subject before, it was only in terms of envy of her friends. Peggy Urton was a homebody. Almost always something kept her from going out. In winter, ice on the streets, I'll slip and break my femoral neck, and you'll have to take care of me summer heat. I can only exist under air conditioning. Spring and fall had their own resonances, and the main means of communication with the world remained the telephone and a friend. And Peggy Urton's life remained bland and uninteresting compared to that of her friends. There were dacha feats, overcoming themselves, unimaginable harvests and industrial-scale harvesting. Sagas concerning grandchildren and granddaughters, their health, their pranks, words, gifts, and of course, His Majesty repair ideas and their realization, exciting search for materials, handy or handless sons and sons-in-law, and finally the triumphant completion of the process to begin tomorrow to change something, because there is no limit to perfection. Against this background, Peggy Urton had nothing to tell. No country house, only flowers on the balcony, no grandchildren, only a cat at the young, and it was better not to even talk about repairs, because her friends comparing with her own would have found Peggy Urton's place murdered. The only thing the elderly woman was saving for was her own funeral. After the sudden death of her husband from a heart attack, she went into debt, and now she did not want to repeat the same story about herself. But even here she was disappointed. Her son only laughed. "Mom, there's no one left on top of the earth. They're all buried somehow. Or do you want a crystal coffin and telephone service in the other world?" "I want you not to be ashamed," Peggy Urton began. "Would you, to be honest, care anymore?" Her friends, on the other hand, spoke with feigned sighs. "Oh, we're trying to save something too. But my granddaughter is studying in St. Petersburg. I'm helping her pay the rent. My grandson wants to change the car. My daughter needs a kitchen set." It appeared that Peggy Urton had set herself some small, secondary goal, and it was weighing her down. But now it's going to turn around. A luxurious house, a real estate. Fixing it up is not like fixing up a high-rise apartment. Peggy Urton withdrew her funeral stash, sold the shares left by her husband. But her friends, pining with envy, gave her a disturbing thought. Peggy Urton immediately summoned her son and had a long conversation with him. That same evening, William told Miranda with a nervous chuckle, "Mom wants you to sign over part of the house to her. She has invested a lot of money in renovations. So here she collected all the receipts and handed them to me for you to look at." They had never had a fight over anything material before money. Things ... William was ready to back down. But what he hadn't expected was for his wife to shine. "Do you think your mom would mind if I signed the whole house over to her? Would she accept a gift like that?" "Are you serious?" "This is as serious as it gets. I'm willing to sign a deed of gift with the same notary." Needless to say, Peggy Urton had a sleepless night when she learned of this. Plans swarmed in her head, and each one was better than the last. Then she saw a garden, a beautiful garden, in an equally beautiful old neighborhood of the city, not in the outskirts of the city, where her friends' cottages were. Then she dreamed of eventually getting rid of the modern cheap stuff and furnishing the old house exclusively with antiques. Then she imagined a housewarming party, and her friends, out of curiosity, of course, would come running and be amazed. That's when it would be their turn to bite their elbows. In the morning, Peggy Urton called her daughter-in-law, not her son, but for the first time. She spoke to her with unusual warmth. Miranda was to come, by all means, and see how she was organizing the house. "It will be your inheritance after my death anyway," said the mother-in-law. Miranda shrugged as if the room was suddenly cold. She had put off this moment until the last minute, but now she had to go. Her mother-in-law showed her the house with the air of a tour guide who had her own personal museum. "And this is where the living room will be. Look at it, it's so pretty. It might be a little dark in the summer, because the windows overlook the garden. The lilac bushes will grow ... I want to hang a big crystal chandelier here. I don't care if they say it's last century. The house needs the last century. And I want a fireplace. Then we can make a real one, by the way. I know how to make a stove. I learned it from my grandmother when I was a kid. In the meantime, we'll put in an electric fireplace, but to have a very good imitation of a live fire." Miranda had been following Peggy Urton from room to room for the past half hour, and the polite smile on her face made her cheekbones ache. Her mother-in-law regretted that the dining room wasn't ready yet, so coffee would have to be had in the kitchen. "And it's cozier there," she added, "and it's 2 steps from here to the pastry shop, so I bought an amazing cake. You take a walk around, see if you have any requests. And I'll call you to the table in 10 minutes. Miranda was alone with the house. Her first impression was that the place was always in semi-darkness. Peggy Urton could talk all she wanted about the crystal chandeliers in the fireplace, but even on a sunny day, the rays wouldn't reach here. Most of the windows faced north, and the shutters, and the lilac bushes, and the mezzanine balcony ... end short. It was dark, without artificial light. Miranda went out into the hallway to find where the kitchen was. Suddenly she was overtaken by that distinctive smell. The smell of the circus. The smell of horse sweat. The tart smell of predators. Fresh sawdust, butterscotch, and baked goods. There was no smell of risk or applause. Miranda tried to figure out where the smell was coming from. How could it be if the painters had recently left the house? She opened one door after another and then stopped at the threshold of a small closet. Here she saw scraps of playbills on the floor, a pile of brightly colored costumes, some strange black hat, a makeup table. Miranda appealed to her sanity. Was it conceivable for Peggy Urton to keep all this stuff, not throw it away? After all, from her point of view, it was junk. Miranda blinked. The closet was empty. It hadn't been renovated, but there was no beggar here, except for the shabby walls, the board floor, and a window in the ceiling so narrow a cat couldn't fit through. The odor was much fainter now. She put her palms to her nose, and sure enough, she had just used them to grasp the door handle. She had just used them to grasp the doorknob. The odor was still there, so she had to wash her hands immediately. The bathtub was quickly found. Barbara Taylor had already had her hands in it, the ornate tile, the modern sink, the lighted mirror. Miranda shook the water off her hands and looked down at herself, petrified. A skull was staring straight into her eyes, empty black eye sockets. Not a human skull, a dog skull, and the mirror didn't show the bathroom itself. Just the skull, just darkness. Miranda not only clamped her eyes shut, she covered her face with her hands. She was afraid the skull would speak to her, and the sounds would be like a voice or a bark. When she opened her eyes, she could still see the terrible vision fading away. It gave way to her own face, deathly pale with widened eyes. Where did you disappear to? My mother-in-law was standing on the doorstep. The coffee's getting cold. My God, it's as if you've seen a ghost. Come with me. I'll give you some drops. After escaping from confinement, Jeremy ended up in an orphanage. Not right away, of course. First, he tried to find his parents, and for that he had to get from the other side of the country to his hometown. He had no experience of homelessness, and he had never had to worry about food or lodging before. So Jeremy had a hard time, but somewhere hitchhiking, perfecting himself in inventing pathetic stories that could touch the harsh truckers, he still reached his home. And he learned that his mother and father no longer lived there. The father died soon after the disappearance of his son, and where the mother could have gone the neighbors did not even guess. The woman didn't share her plans with them. Maybe she could no longer see the house, where everything reminded her of her family. And if so, she probably changed the city too. He could have kept looking, but it was winter, and Jeremy was so exhausted and depleted that he acted foolishly, without thinking of the consequences. He slept in the cellars, if he could get into them, and he scrounged whatever food he could get. For example, he would go into the bistro, and while the tables were still being cleared, he would snatch a piece of bread that had been forgotten, or a pie that had not been eaten. He wore himself to rags and eventually ended up in the police station, and from there, in an orphanage. Hungry and struggling to survive. Jeremy didn't notice that he had lost his gift, and if he had, he wouldn't have regretted it. After the way fate had treated him, he considered the gift a curse, and was glad to be rid of it. But it turned out that his ability to read other people's thoughts did not disappear, but as if hibernated in hard times. And as soon as the boy warmed up and ate a little, everything came back. But now Jeremy knew that he had to treat his gift as if it were a potent substance, use it only when it was absolutely necessary. And he had to hide his gift from others so that no one would even realize it. Jeremy was fortunate in that he'd come to the orphanage after he'd mourned his parents, and he was sure he'd never find his mother. Either his tears had dried up forever. Neither sentimentality nor self-pity was in him anymore, but he was always waiting for the next blow of fate, and was ready to respond to it at least with sharp, boyish fists. And it paid off. In the orphanage, he was not bullied, he was not mocked. On the contrary, he even earned some respect. Everyone knew that he had no relatives, that he had been vagabonding for a long time. Usually such kids are not interested in studying. Sometimes they can hardly even read. Jeremy pounced on the science, as if he knew he needed it, that he couldn't do without it. The boys tried to tease him. They trumped him with their ability to sass the teacher. but Jeremy cut off such taunts at once. He began with a florid phrase, almost entirely made up of foul words. It was an invitation to be listened to. And then he said he wasn't going to work a penny job or drink himself to death. Life owes me a lot, he teased. Spitting through a knocked-out tooth was convenient. But what even the teachers, accustomed to their pups going to college at best, didn't expect was that Jeremy applied to medical school and passed the competition. There was no one around him with whom he could share his designs. You'll learn, biology teacher. You're good. We'll be treated by you later. And Jeremy wanted to deal with the superpowers of man, and to understand what nature gave him, and what these terrible people, who almost broke his life, hoped to get from him. His brain was designed for scientific work. None of his classmates had such a tenacious memory, such a pronounced ability to generalize and analyze. And in his senior year, his mentors had already said definitely that Jeremy had a place in graduate school, that he should think about a PhD. As he had no one to support him, he worked part-time at the hospital in his spare time. He did not want to stay in a hostel, and as soon as the opportunity arose, he rented an apartment. That was the beginning of his library and card catalog. He collected very specific things. There was a lot written on the subject that interested him, but he did not want to chase sensation but facts. And also he was tracing the path of the very circus that seemed immortal. One could leaf through old newspapers, go deeper and deeper into the past, and be convinced the troupe existed even then. It kept traveling around the world. But at the same time it described a circle, invariably at regular intervals returning to the same city. And the circusmen stayed there not in hotels, not in the most run-down motels. The same house beckoned them, as if it were their own. They put their carriages in its yard, and from here they started their new wanderings around the world. More and more often the Ouroboros came to Jeremy's mind the most ancient symbol, the snake biting its tail, the alternation of creation and destruction, life and death, the beginning of a new cycle. And if he mosaicked all the evidence he had gathered, if he could believe the picture, it was only a matter of time before the new cycle began. In a short time they would be there again, in that town, near that house. It was frightening to think about. I wondered if that girl who had saved him back then had survived. Jeremy thought of her from time to time. He hoped she hadn't had to pay for it. But himself, was he still so attractive to them, to this traveling troupe? He felt he was. Which meant he had to go there to test a hunch. And to do that, he needed the circus people to know where he was. This whole thing was a hell of a bait and switch. He knew he'd get drunk, but it had to be done thoughtfully, to get to that point that only you can feel, when the fear that my mom that was a century ago called ugly recedes. Instead of fear comes the feeling that now, as in some game, you are going to take up a sword and go to crush your enemies left and right, not thinking that you yourself might fall from a dashing blow. He needed that kick from his subconscious to cross a line he'd been afraid to think about before. And at the same time, he didn't want to get so full that there would be a feeling of swings, and he'd be dizzy, and the fear would be replaced by despair at his own helplessness. Apparently, the higher powers decided that he was doing the right thing, because the hotel was found instantly. And according to the map, it was near the train station. It didn't matter to Jeremy what conditions he would live in. If he was alive in a few days, he would leave this city and try to forget it forever. And if he had nightmares in his sleep, it wouldn't be a lousy number. He threw his bag on the bed, locked the door again, and went to find a bar where he could sit for a long time without being disturbed. A boulevard crossing the center of the city started from the station square. Everything here was so bright, so light, so benign, and so far from what his soul was full of. 2 white trees like emerald candles, beds of roses, souvenir stands. He peered around the bar with the kind of painful scrutiny that a sick man would look for in a drugstore. At last he caught sight of the basement. The heavy door at this hour of the morning was open to his surprise, and he hurried downstairs. And in the cool, semi-darkness of the place, you couldn't tell the day was just beginning. Not a single customer yet. Jeremy was the first. He chose a table in the far corner, asked the bartender to open a bottle of whiskey, and bring some kind of appetizer. He thought he'd learned to control himself. But the whiskey had come earlier, and Jeremy poured himself a bottle of whiskey, so much so that the bartender would have called it not a double but a quintuple whiskey, and drank it like water. That's what he'd come to. It was only then that he let go a little, the tight knot of fear loosened, and he could breathe. The waitress came over and put a plate of sausage and breadcrumbs in front of him. There's nothing else. He heard her apologetic tone and thought he should pay at once. He didn't know how his sit-down was going to end. The girl immediately understood his gesture. It meant both no change and get out of here. It seemed like an hour or more had passed. Jeremy was sipping his whiskey now and thinking about the fact that there was no way he was going to be able to play in the open. The odds were too unequal, and there was very little chance that the trap he had planned would work. He realized that this time he was risking not his freedom, but his life. And these creatures were capable of such a thing that death would seem like deliverance. Someone sat down across from him, and Jeremy looked up. It was a girl, very young, in a blue dress. She kept her eyes on him, and he thought the waitress had called her. Maybe she felt sorry for him. From the outside, he must have epitomized bitter loneliness. Or maybe she thought he was a tempting prey, easy to get her hands on for money. "Would you like a drink?" he asked the girl. "Then get yourself a glass." It seemed to him that everyone now wanted to escape the madness of the big by immersing themselves in the small. The girl drank and said something to him, touching his hand lightly. And she was sneaking sausage off the plate, sneaking it, trying to be sneaky. She wanted to look pretty, but she was probably very hungry. Jeremy could see that she was trying to please him. For the first time in a long time, he looked with that attentive gaze in which his gift was awakening. Yeah, she was living on a shoestring. She rented a room for two with a friend and spent the money she earned on clothes. After her poverty-stricken childhood, she was attracted to every brightly colored rag. She couldn't get enough of everything. Now she needed shoes, pink, high heels. But she really liked him young, nice-looking, not pushy. He had to go, damn it, he had to go. He took 2 red bills out of his wallet, placed them on the table, and then took the girl's hand and put her palm down on the bills. "Kathleen," he said, "buy yourself some shoes." He patted her shoulder a little and went on his way, ignoring her shocked face. He knew the address, and it appeared that it was the same boulevard he had to follow all the way to the end. A streetcar rang on his right hand. Here was a photographer, laying out national costumes on a bench, waiting for customers. A store selling shawarma and chibareks. An old building of a polyclinic. Fountains. The boulevard rose upward, and every now and then the level path was replaced by steps, and one could not sink into deep reverie as he wished. One had to remember not to stumble. Finally, when he couldn't wait any longer, Jeremy sighed a deep, convulsive sigh. Shoving his hands in his pockets, he walked toward the house. Toward the house. He expected to find the place dilapidated and desolate, but he stopped in amazement. The house had clearly become truly residential, and the new owner had decided to make it as good as any. The white plastic windows seemed decidedly out of harmony with the brick, which was not even 100 years old. He also noticed the curtains obviously new. What is this doing? Jeremy looked around, as if he wanted to call the people around him as witnesses. He noticed the old man next door, who was looking at him with his eyes shaded from the sun. "No one's home," said the old man. "The landlady hasn't come yet." Jeremy realized that the conversation might be a respite for him, and walked over to the fence that separated 1 yard from the other. "Who's the hostess?" "You don't know." Now the old man's look was suspicious. "What's the matter? Do you want to buy a house?" Not exactly. Well, how, in fact, was to explain everything to an ignorant person. In a few days about here, I have to meet friends. They know the landlady well, and I just arrived earlier. "So you're a guest?" the old man went on inquiring. His eyebrows were white and bushy, which made him look menacing. "Children are afraid of such old men. Have you come to visit?" "Sort of." "Can you tell me a little bit about the missus?" "I don't like gossip." The old man wanted to get back to his business, but he said, "Especially in this house, gossiping is not worth it." And that was a clue to a new conversation, because after those words, Jeremy couldn't move away from the fence. No amount of force would make him. "I hear there are some bad things going on in this house," he said casually. "Heard from where?" "From whom?" And again the look of those blue eyes, so bright they seemed icy. But hell, he couldn't tell the old man that this house is a kind of dining room for ... After that, the neighbor. "If he says anything, it will be on the phone. Dialing 03, come here. There's a psycho. Take him away before he makes trouble." "I used to live in this town," Jeremy said with the look of a man in a hurry who wanted to talk. "And I remember the circus used to stop here. right on this lawn. But these words of the old man were unexpectedly convincing. Who indeed could have known about it except the old-timer? It was a long time ago. You must have been very young. How can you not remember ... Here, everyone who lives around here were afraid that these lunatics would do something crazy. They'd get drunk, set fire to something drunk, God forbid. They'd get into a fight. They didn't. In general, the circus has come here twice in my memory. Jeremy raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yeah, that's the case you were talking about. That was 25 years ago. And before that you still have to measure a quarter. You weren't around then, but I was then, like you are now. Well, it's been 25 years again. Maybe they'll come again. They will, Jeremy said thoughtfully, yet confidently. They can't not come. I was surprised it had been so long, and I thought the house had been torn down. At that time it was ownerless. You can't tear this house down that easily. He is himself, but the old man did not continue. Were you inside? Jeremy knew he had been, but he could only read his mind when the old man started to remember. And the old man told him that it was strange for many years he had never established such a relationship with any of the inhabitants of the house that he could easily visit each other. It's like a kaleidoscope. Some lived there, then others I can't remember them all. Once a young couple asked me to feed their cat. They left me the key. They were going somewhere. I went and fed it. Well, it's all right. The old man's gesture begone was completely unexpected. Jeremy flinched. What is it? On the third day, a cat went missing. He disappeared from a locked house. I wanted to give up myself by then. It seems like everything is normal around there. Well, the most ordinary things. But when you walk around the rooms, you start to see the hell of what you see. I've never suffered from nerves. But this is not good at all. There's no animal, that's all. And all the windows are closed. I think, how will I report to the young ones? And they didn't come back. They left, and that was the end of it. I've kept the key to the house ever since. No one's ever asked me for it. The new owners must have changed the lock. It's not the main door, not the front door, but the back door. I see. And tell me about the last hostess. Jeremy knew that a house could change hands in many ways, but only its true owners could pass it on. It's just a girl, Miranda. She inherited it. Only she gave it to her mother-in-law right away. She's the one who's been renovating it. Young people don't need all that. The land, greenhouses. They're not ready to put down roots yet. They've got wind in their heads, going here and there. My mother-in-law doesn't live here yet, but she'll probably move in soon. She's already brought some potted flowers. I don't think they'll survive here. There's not enough light. You wouldn't happen to know how to find Miranda, would you? The old man shrugged. I think she works at a maternity hospital. And there's only one in town. But I can't say for sure whether she is there or not. All the same, Jeremy shook the old man's hand sincerely. Thank you very much. The ... He was lucky the second time, which was much more important. The first time he'd found a suitable hotel at the first request, and there was room. And now, when he looked up the phone number of the maternity hospital on the internet and asked for Miranda, a girl came up. As soon as he started talking about the house, he knew from her startled silence that it was her. Can I meet you? He asked. Jeremy was prepared for Miranda to refuse him, and then he'd come to her in the hospital and lay down his life, but she'd listen to him. The girl doesn't realize that she's destined to be the bloody delicatessen at the meal that's already in progress. And only if they act together will she have a chance. His own chance will increase a little. But there's no risk. What do you want to tell me? Heard Jeremy. Please ... preferably today ... pick any place that is convenient for you. I'll take half an hour tops. She must have heard the pleading intonations in his voice, was silent for a few moments, and then said with determination, Good. There's a little cafe near this house. I'll meet you there. At 4 o'clock. Miranda was almost half an hour late. It wasn't much longer. Sometimes her husband had to wait for her until late in the evening. That meant another woman in labor wasn't doing so well. But now she was standing in this small cafe, which was more like a diner, and squinting at the room. Who should recognize whom, he, her, or she, him? She wondered later how she could have thought she wouldn't recognize him at once. A young man was sitting by the window. At first, she wondered if there was a movie being filmed somewhere. He looked like the hero of a movie from the 50s. A light-colored coat, dark hair, thin features. And yes, it was him. The same one who had been coming to her in her deepest deaf dreams for many years. He raised his head. He saw at once the picture that stood before her eyes. He small, dirty, exhausted in a cage, and she, pushing on the bolt. They looked at each other, and not a single word was spoken. But they talked. It can't be. It can't be that you got this house. I'm sure this inheritance is from her. She's the one who said you'll remember my gift. Do you know what that means? Yeah, and I don't hold out much hope of surviving. This house is a monster. You should hear it when you walk through it, the way it crunches. It's like it's kneading its bones, stretching, smelling you. A waitress came to their table, and both of them had to return to reality. Miranda wondered what the girl thought of them. They looked like a strange couple with their silent game. Without taking her eyes off Jeremy, she took the menu. Still, she had to make an effort. Tattered pages and worn plastic. Miranda thought her friend must be hungry. She was suddenly hungry too. And that was a sure sign that, despite the approaching danger, she felt a kind of confidence. Usually when she was worried, she had no appetite. But now she wasn't alone. Bring us dumplings. With broth? With sour cream? With tomato? 2 double servings. And a cup of sour cream each. They didn't notice whether they had waited long enough to order. They had too much to say to each other. How have you been living? You're asking me if I've ever forgotten that. Oh yeah. Dreams? In the orphanage they said that I often scream in my sleep. The boys used to wake me up ... when I started studying at the institute. I got hooked on pills. Antidepressants? Yeah. Chuckles. Are you married? How could I get married if I waited every day for them to get to me? They come out of nowhere. If an outsider saw all this, they'd go crazy. We didn't go crazy because we were kids. Kids are more flexible. So no wife. And I don't have kids for the same reason. They glanced over with a bitter smile of equals. Were you really hoping this would all be over for you if you gave the house to your mother-in-law? It hung on me like a weight, she admitted. I wouldn't have taken it at all, mine made me. And I also tried to talk myself into it. How do I know it was her gift? And when I went in there, I realized the house couldn't be anything else. It smells like them. Their beasts, their sweat and their powder. And I'm the only one who smells it, no one else. In everyone's eyes were crazy. They brought the dumplings. Steam was still rising above them. The smell of meat and bay leaf interrupted the memories of the terrible. Both of them gorged themselves on the food. I've tried to forget, she said when her plate was empty, have you? And I tried to learn everything I could about them. Because the day would come, the hour would come, and then there would be no getting away from it. I didn't want to be taken warm. Then explain to me. He shook his head. Don't ask me how old they are, I don't know. Some of it I had to gather from bits and pieces, some of it is speculation. Sometimes I think they're as old as the earth. Sometimes I think they come from somewhere in the Middle Ages, when people's fears materialized. And where they are now, I don't know either. Then why did you, We'll draw them up, he said, or would you try to run away? I shouldn't. You're still so young. You'll suffer for a long time. And in the end, fear will suffocate you anyway. And how do you think you're going to lure them in? Instead of answering, he closed his eyes. It was easy to do, to be in the cage he remembered, down to every scratch on the iron bars, every crevice in the floorboards. He remembered how many steps along, across, and askew, on the crevice that blew him especially hard on cold days. He would have gnawed out a loophole to escape, but they guarded not only his body but his thoughts, which was far worse. And when this girl opened the door for him, he concentrated on not thinking, not about anything else, only the pain from the nails digging into his palms. But as he gathered on the internet, in libraries, in bookstores, everything that might have touched them, he called on his memory again, painful though it was. But it required separating the grain from the chaff. Figuring out what was true and what was false in memory was the only thing he could rely on. He knew them too well to take certain things on faith. You're weaker than I am, he said. You hear only my thoughts and I hear everyone's. But now they're onto you. Maybe it's just revenge. Oh, they're very vindictive. Or maybe they're just hungry. This house isn't the only one. And when they get hungry, they wander into one of the houses like people wander into a diner. Usually it's on a harvest day and hour. This time they'll come for you, but if they know I'm here, they'll come early. Aye, she asked a little audibly. And we'll have to make sure the house wakes up early too, so that it will take them, not us, for food. She shook her head fearfully. You're groping. You're not sure of anything. And we're risking too much. You won't get another chance. Do you have the key to the house? I gave everything to my mother-in-law. I can't go to the house alone. She'll definitely follow me. Luckily, my neighbor still has the key. He's had it for ages, but maybe the lock hasn't been changed. Let's go check it out. They were indeed hungry, but only those who knew their true nature could see that. To everyone else, they were just ordinary people who met twice a day at a common table in the caravan where EVA lived. In the mornings they drank tea, and in the evenings after the shows they stayed up late, the smell of charcoal grilled meat stirring the nostrils of passers-by. But a knowledgeable person would have noticed the twitching of their hands, which had suddenly become dry, the wrinkles on their faces, and the light that sometimes flashed in their eyes. They knew that when they were truly satiated, they would get rid of the signs of age and the hunger that tormented them from within. But they sometimes had to endure long enough, for not every prey was suitable. The prey had to be different from the human herd, and it was not always possible to find a suitable one. Immortality comes at a high price, and not everyone could withstand it. There used to be more of them, many more, but some had fallen behind along the way. This Vera ... she'd asked to be let go, to be left to live near one of their houses. What the hell she was eating there, picking up scum. No wonder she eventually grew old and died. Eve felt her death. She was the most empathetic of them all, always knowing exactly what they needed and how they could get it. So it came naturally that she became senior to them. But never had she met such an attractive prey as that boy. That was why no one dared to infringe on his life. Their power multiplied with him, and he was bound to become one of them sooner or later, if he hadn't escaped. Now they will have to settle for less, much less. Vera is gone, and now their cottage belongs to someone else ... Well, happiness for the owners if they don't mess around. Can you feel it? Miranda asked as they entered the house. Jeremy made a sign with his hand to wait. He stepped as carefully as if he were walking on a taut wire, carefully calibrating his every step, holding his breath. He was afraid to disturb, to wake the house before its time. And yet it seemed to Miranda that something was already beginning to happen. The air wavered slightly, as it would over a campfire. The floorboards crackled a little louder, and the floor seemed to waver slightly. Then Jeremy couldn't stand it, pointed to the new window and raised his eyebrows slightly. It's the mother-in-law, Miranda whispered hastily. She's in charge of all the changes around here. I wonder how the house didn't chew her arm off. She is so mediocre that she was probably of no interest to him. And they managed to get the key without any problems. The old man even followed them to see if the young man could open the back door. He had kept the key for so many years, and he was curious. Jeremy saw at once that the key would fit. It slid into the keyhole so easily that it turned on its own. The old man left, and they entered the house. Here not only did the corridor that ran through the entire mansion begin. From here, from the back door, stone steps led down to the cellar. That's where they both went down in the first place. Of course, Peggy Urton, with her great household plans, couldn't help getting to this corner of the house. The cellar was empty, the workmen having removed all the junk that had accumulated there over the years. And the shelving units they'd ordered hadn't arrived yet. Just a dungeon. Just a crypt. A ray of light, which seemed blue, fell from a narrow window in the ceiling. Jeremy stood a few feet from the window, his head up. The light had transformed his face. Too, it had lost its natural color, drenched in that dead blue. Jeremy closed his eyes and whispered something inaudible. Miranda realized that the irreversible was happening now. He was calling out to them, and he seemed to have succeeded in reaching their minds. Then he opened his eyes and turned to Miranda, but his gaze was crazy, like that of a frightened child. She took both his hands. "Did you succeed?" He tried to swallow. It didn't work on the first try. "They'll be here tomorrow night." "And what are they?" "They can't believe their happiness." Peggy Urton ventured to spend the first night in her new home. Her bedroom had been ready for a long time. But to be honest, the new owner had dreamed of doing things differently. To organize a housewarming party, to invite her friends, and after a noisy feast, scattered among the rooms to sleep soundly and without dreams. It was a little scary to be alone. But the party was postponed. That friend, without whom it made no sense to organize all this, went to her daughter, and for a long time. She would be back in a month at the earliest, and Peggy Urton couldn't wait that long. "I'm as curious as Eve," she liked to say on every occasion. And now she convinced herself that there was nothing to be afraid of, that this was not some forgotten corner. This was a city, and there were people on the right and on the left. Of course, no one would dare to rob a mansion. It was not like robbing a cottage. But she chided herself for not ordering bars for the windows, and decided to do it soon. She arrived at her new home without telling her son or his wife, with a light load in her hands and a bad headache. She arrived that very evening, a couple hours before sunset. She'd been thinking since morning that she'd make a feast for herself, fry some chops while singing, open some wine. But now the thought of food made her sick. Peggy Urton dropped 2 green pills into the palm of her hand and took a drink of tap water. She thought for a moment and added another pill, for her blood pressure, just in case. Wrinkling her nose and putting her fingers to her temples, it was a little cold in the house, and her hands were still icy. She made her way to the bedroom, lay down, and covered herself with a downy shawl. She expected the pain to continue for a long time, but it suddenly receded, and unnoticed, Peggy Urton fell asleep. "They're sure it'll be business as usual," Jeremy said as they settled by the window. "After all, the deadline, 25 years, is only a few days away. That's why they'll come in to get us, you can be sure of it. They're getting close." Miranda didn't ask now if he'd succeeded in waking the house. She could sense that he was almost awake. The visions that tormented her became brighter. They flashed in succession. Wherever she looked, she saw the victims, their last moments, while for the house itself they were memories pleasant to the point of shivering, gastronomic. Miranda tried to look only at Jeremy. He was her only hope of getting out of here alive. "Why did you become a midwife?" he asked suddenly. "Ever since I've been there, I've just carried the breath of death with me," she said simply. "I wanted to be closer to the birth of life. Displace it, did you? And I wanted to know what kind of power I had been given. Why am I like this? Are there others like me?" They were silent. Maybe it lasted a long time, maybe a few moments. Something warm and sticky dripped down Miranda's cheek. She tried to wipe it away and suddenly realized. The house is drooling. You could hear the panic in her whisper. Instead of answering, he pointed to the window. She didn't understand at first, and then she was numb. There was a lawn in front of the house, lit by the light of lanterns, and there were shadows moving across it. Those tales of the unclean, which seemed so faded and naive now, assured her that the undead didn't reflect in mirrors or give shadows. But now they saw with their own eyes no people, just shadows on the grass. Here a man in a hat, here a woman in a long dress. An old woman with a beak, and more women, and men. Men. The shadows flocked to the front door, which was thoughtfully ajar. Peggy Urton woke up with a pounding heart, as if she'd had a nightmare. She didn't remember the plot of the dream, though, and she didn't understand what there was to be afraid of, but the feeling of dread wouldn't go away. She reached for the phone on the nightstand and turned it on to see what time it was. It showed that she had slept for only a little while, about 2 hours. Everything looked so calm. Moonlight was pouring in through the window, no noise. She was surrounded by things that she herself had chosen in the stores, then commanded the movers who brought them in and arranged them. There was no one and nothing foreign, nothing alien in her room. Only shadows lay on the floor, special nocturnal shadows. But should one be afraid of shadows? And yet something was happening. She looked closely and listened. Everything shook slightly. It couldn't have been an earthquake, for it had never happened in their land. It sounded more like the shaking of a horse that couldn't wait to get out of its seat. Peggy Urton hastily put on her glasses, raked her dressing gown from the chair. She never had premonitions, nor did she believe in them. But the feeling that came over her was so strong, so primal, that she could not help obeying it. Where are those damn slippers? And what on earth is going on, gentlemen? What is it? Miranda whispered. Why did they come dressed like that? She could see sadness, if not doom, in Jeremy's gaze, but his voice was as firm as ever. Maybe he wanted to reassure her with that tone. Like this? because they've come for us, and no one else is supposed to see them. What do they want to do with us? And I don't know about me, but they want you alive. Not anymore. I mean alive not in the sense that you and I understand IT ... Most likely they want to make me one of them ... But first ... I read how they take people ... True. It's a legend, but what can we rely on but legends? Nothing else. First, they become our shadows. Can we escape our own shadows? Never. Only the shadow follows the man, but now it will be the other way around. We will have to follow them. But you don't, do you? It's not, is it? Let's run to the basement. Hurry. They shouldn't have been able to turn on the lights, and there shouldn't have been the slightest noise from them. What force helped them not to trip on the steps? ... Jeremy held Miranda's hand tightly by the wrist. That's how you hold babies. Only the walls flashed. If the house really was surrounded on all sides, it would be a total failure. But they were lucky when they ran up the steps to the back door and opened it. There was nothing but lawn in front of them. The lawn, which here was lighted only by the moon, and the darkening garden beyond it. One last dash. When they reached the lilac bushes, they took cover behind them. Now watch what happens, Jeremy said quietly. She could rather read it on his lips. But what if things don't go your way? If the house is with them? He shrugged. There's nothing more we can do anyway. Several endless languid moments passed. Maybe during this time the circus ghosts were searching the house? And then, Miranda and Jeremy were startled by a sharp bang. It was the front door slamming shut. Then the blows came one after another, but not as hard. It was the slamming of the shutters on the windows. The house clenched its jaws. If someone stood watching the ancient mansion from across the street at this late-night hour, they would probably think they were hallucinating. It was like a stereo picture. When a kind of miracle happens before your eyes, the perspective changes, and you see something no one else sees. The house stood still, but there, inside it, some living organism was clenching its teeth. Huge jaws were walking. Someone invisible was satisfying a fierce hunger. In vain, the prey battered at the closed windows and doors. The desperate screams were silent to everyone. Almost everyone. Only the couple hiding in the lilac bushes behind the house could hear them. Miranda fell to the grass, covering her ears with her hands. She was used to the screams of women in labor, but she couldn't hear these undead cries. Look at the smoke, she heard Jeremy's voice. Overcoming herself, she raised her head. No one would flood the boiler in the summer. Only in mid-autumn would you see smoke rising from the chimneys above the roofs. But over this house there was smoke. Thick pink changed to red, the color of fire, or blood. The smoke rose to the sky and melted into it. Are we the only ones seeing this too? Or are the neighbors calling the fire department now? Jeremy didn't answer her question. He couldn't take his eyes off the frightening and mesmerizing sight. It took quite some time before the screams subsided. Here was the last faint moan and a ringing silence. The smoke had dried up. And then, Miranda was ready to wipe her eyes. But it wasn't imagined, it was really happening. Right before her eyes, the house began to deteriorate, returning to its true age. Cracks ran down the white walls, the whiteness darkening into a dirty gray. The roof was decrepit, and in some places holes appeared in it. Instead of the now empty black openings, like eye sockets in a decaying skull. The door snapped and hung on one hinge. The outbuilding collapsed, but silently, as if in a silent movie. Now the house in front of them was not a house, but a ruin that was God knows how old. Yin and yang, Ouroboros biting itself by the tail. Everything in the world is interconnected, and the end of one thing becomes the beginning of another, and the beginning inevitably leads to the end. What did it all mean? Miranda felt like she was teetering on the brink of losing her mind. They're not coming back, Jeremy rose with such difficulty, as if he were as old as these ruins. It seems they can't exist without each other. The house was too hungry, and his hosts came in handy. They were its last meal. It's all over now. But Miranda couldn't get up. She had no strength. She sat on the ground, ruffling her hair with her hands, which were shaking ... She couldn't even cry from the shock. But they heard the crying. A normal human cry. A woman's bitter. Who's that? Neighbors? Jeremy held out his hand to Miranda and helped her up. A woman stood a few steps away from the house. A heavy figure, robe and barefoot slippers. Miranda squinted something familiar to her. Wait, there's no way. Elena, what brings Peggy here? Who? My mother-in-law. Miranda let go of Jeremy's hand and ran awkwardly, as if her legs weren't quite right yet. Yes, it was Peggy Urton. She stood there sobbing, putting her fists in her mouth, probably to keep from howling. What is it? What is it? She repeated. How did you get here? The women, young and old, stood a stone's throw from each other. Why? The gas couldn't have exploded in here, could it? Why did the whole place collapse? Peggy Urton was as confused as a small child. You guys slept here? Miranda finally got the message. The mother-in-law nodded shallowly. The first night. Rejoice that you made it out in time, that you're alive. Miranda took hold of her head again. God, they almost killed Vitya's mother. Tell me, did you destroy this place? Maybe you regretted writing the deed of gift to me. You thought you didn't want me to have the house? Why would you do that? Why ruin everything? I mean, it would have gone to you in the end. Miranda looked at her mother-in-law with wide eyes and couldn't understand what she was asking her. So it's you. Peggy was already howling. Do you think I'm what? Miranda covered her eyes. Breathe, she told herself. She had to focus on breathing, or she would collapse right now, right here, just like these walls. This night had cost her too much. The street was no longer quiet. Late passers-by, neighbors running out of their houses. Some were aghast, some were filming the ruins of the house on their phones. Some were calling and demanding to send rescuers and an ambulance. Though why call anyone now? The voices were humming, merging into the steady noise of a swarm of bees. Miranda looked back. The clearing behind her was empty. Only the moon, the grass, and the shadows of the sprawling lilac bushes. So how did it end? Jeremy asked. We sold the plot. And they sold it very well. William finally got involved. The place is golden. They grabbed the land with their hands. Of course, everything here will be demolished. The new owner will build. En knew Hosea, and Jeremy said the words, almost syllabically, emphasizing the last one. A very down-to-earth man. He has his own business. He drills wells for people. And he has a big family, a wife and 4 sons. The boys will be out there racing in the garden with their dog. And we bought my mother-in-law a summer house. She cried so much her dream was gone, and all her savings. She spent everything for this house. Her credit card is bare now. She sold her shares. She told us I'd become a beggar. So William picked out a big house for her, big enough for all her friends. I think she's a bit relieved now. Jeremy nodded. They stood at the bus station, waiting for his bus to arrive. He'd wanted to leave yesterday, but Miranda had asked him to wait a day. She wanted to say goodbye to him. She had been on night duty the night before, and now she came running straight from the hospital, tortured. He knew those sunken, and yet somehow peculiarly shining eyes a sign of long sleeplessness and of the fact that the hard duty had ended well. Why don't you stay? She repeated for the 1,500th time. They both knew that he had no one to rush to accept his patience. And they also knew the axiom that he could only stay if they were together. Otherwise, tearing up his soul. It's even harder than fighting ghosts. Shadows. And there was only one moment when he asked her that question, with his eyes. It didn't require a mental conversation, just a look. Do you love me? Will you go away with me? He asked. Her answering look expressed both struggle and anguish at the same time. And that was enough. He couldn't hurt her. She had a debt to the man who had once saved her, and who had taken care of her all these years. The heavy bus slowly pulled out of the parking lot, pulled up to the platform. The doors opened. Go on. Take the window seat. Jeremy put his arms around her and pulled her against him. They stood like that, swaying slightly. She closed her eyes. Never had she felt so peaceful and blissful. Never. Not even in the cradle. You promise? Do you remember? They had said it almost simultaneously. Now they were looking at each other. He wiped the tears from her cheeks with his palm. If ever, anything else ... this devil's circus is similar ... if, even just a premonition. I'll call you. I'll be there. I promise. I remember. He pulled away so gently that she didn't feel it right away. She saw him coming up the steps to the bus. ... It was over. But there was still eternity, the one where evil is only an accident, and where there is no fear of losing each other, for their two souls can become one.